Uncovering the facts about the Inca Empire is not easy. It takes experts of all kinds to understand the evidence the Inca left behind. Mathematicians work to unravel the only records left by people of the empire, quipus, which are knotted strings that counted the Inca people and what they produced down to the last dried potato. Archaeologists dig up ancient temples, buried cities, and mummies that tell of a complex society. Historians look into the writings of Spanish conquistadors, conquerors, priests, and government clerks, the only written records of the Inca culture. All these experts must separate fact from fiction. The history of the Inca Empire is full of legends of stone warriors and visits from the gods, and not all of it really happened. The work was more difficult because the Incas had no written language or numerical system. The Inca civilization passed its history along by oral tradition, telling stories. So, the empire's founding may have occurred in 1200 or not. Dates and details of the early Inca Empire are all estimates. The Spanish arrived in 1524. Because they loved to write about everything they saw and did, they were the ones who provided the first written records of Inca life. But before that, from 1200 to about 1525, we have a blend of fact and fiction, legends and daring deeds, and cultural pride. Historians have been frustrated because there is no way to separate stories of greatness from actual feats. Even the term Inca can be confusing. Inca refers to a single person, a social class, and a civilization. Inca is a Quechua word that means leader or chief, the empire's supreme leader. An Inca, also known as a Sapa Inka, a unique leader or chief, was present. 13. Sapa Inkas ruled the empire throughout its history. Some were more successful than others. The last true Sapa Inka was Atahualpa, R. Одна 1530, Dva 1533. Although there were Sapa Inkas after Atahualpa, such as Manco Inca and Tupac Amaru, they had no power. Once the Spanish took over, they controlled the land, the people, and the Sapa Inka. The Sapa Inka led a noble class of about 1,000 men. These nobles, known as Incas or Capac Incas, led the empire's government, religion, and military. All were relatives of the Sapa Inka. Women played leadership roles in some areas of life, especially those that involved other women. But they were generally not leaders of groups that included men. Today, people often refer to all citizens living under the rule of the Incas as Incas. They were not. The Inca Empire incorporated these conquered cultures and civilizations. Inca subjects often continued to worship their gods. Such worship was allowed as long as they worshipped the main Inca gods, the sun, the moon, and thunder lightning. They wore their traditional attire, refraining from donning the garments or headgear of any other ethnic group or region. The empire began in Cusco. This village was founded by Manco Capac, the first Sapa Inka, and settled by his followers. The village still exists today in southeastern Peru. Eventually, Inca influence spread from the eastern foothills of the Andes Mountains to the Pacific Ocean, from present-day Ecuador in the north to modern Chile and Argentina in the south. The Sapa Inka ruled over land that stretched 2,500 miles, ca. 4,023 kilometers, along western South America, or roughly the distance from Los Angeles, California to Charleston, South Carolina. However, the distance is an estimated guess because no records, detailed maps, or exact borders exist from those times. The Inca Empire did not begin a new culture and civilization, developing unique ideas about religion, agriculture, arts, music, or warfare. Instead, it assimilated, took in and absorbed other cultures. Conquered peoples inside the empire became part of its huge labor force and learned Inca values and beliefs. The empire welcomed new ideas, and after experimentation, improved the arts and technology of others. For example, the Inca Empire is noted for beautiful, complex and durable stone-made buildings. We refer to this stone-built structure as masonry. The Inca did not invent advanced masonry techniques. However, the work of the conquered Tiahuanaco culture near Lake Titicaca inspired them. The Incas improved upon and adapted these Tiahuanaco masonry techniques. They also borrowed museum-quality gold and silver metalwork techniques from the artisans of the Chimu people of the Moche Valley, another earlier culture. The Cronistas. Much of what is known today about the Inca Empire comes from Spanish cronistas, soldiers, clerks and priests who wrote detailed accounts of the history, customs and daily lives of Inca citizens. Some, but not all, of the Spanish who came to the Inca Empire kept journals, wrote letters, and recorded the events of their conquest. Cronistas provide primary source material, history written by the people who lived it, from the viewpoint of a conquering people. The Spanish came from a different cultural background and did not always appreciate or understand the Inca. Felipe Guaman Poma de Ayala, circa 1538 to circa 1620, an Andes native, wrote the longest and perhaps most valuable document about the Inca Empire, La Nueva Crónica y Buen Gobierno, the New Chronicle and Good Government. This 1,179-page manuscript describes Inca culture, history, occupations, religious practices, and government. Guaman Poma included more than 400 drawings with his writing. It was written in the early 1600s, but was not discovered until 1908, when German scholar Richard Pietschmann found it in the Royal Danish Library in Copenhagen. Garcilaso de la Vega, 1539 to 1616, was the son of the Spanish conquistador Sebastián de la Vega Vargas and the Inca princess Chimpu Oclo. Garcilaso had a European education, but also knew and respected the Inca culture. His writings about the Inca civilization are detailed and present an exciting picture of the people and their lives. There are several volumes, all grouped under the Incas' royal commentaries. The Royal Council of Madrid was not enthusiastic about the chronicle by Garcilaso de la Vega, so they changed the title from Royal Commentaries to General History of Peru. Scholars know very little about Juan de Betanzos circa 1550, author of Suma y Narración de los Inca, Narrative of the Incas. He was Spanish by birth but lived in Peru most of his life. Betanzos may have been a Spanish scribe, a person who copies out documents, a government clerk, and an interpreter who investigated native traditions and customs. He married an Inca woman, lived in Cusco in the 1540s, and was fluent in Spanish and Quechua, the language of the Incas. The Spanish corregidors, royal administrators, certainly found his skills useful. His Suma y Narración has been translated into English and provides one of the earliest accounts of Inca culture. Cronista Pedro de Chiesa de León, circa 1518 to 1560, was born and educated in Spain, and travelled much of the Inca Empire as a soldier. His Crónica del Perú, Chronicle of Peru, published in 1553, presents richly detailed accounts of the Spanish conquest from a military viewpoint. He provides accurate geographical descriptions of the region and explanations of the Inca government and culture. He also explains the military strategy the Spanish forces, which were relatively small, used to defeat the Incas. Chiesa de León observed the Inca people and deeply understood their ways. He described how hard the Inca worked in his Chronica. No one who was lazy or tried to live by the work of others was tolerated. Everyone had to work. Thus, on certain days, each lord went to his lands and took the plough in hand, and cultivated the earth, and did other things. Even the Incas themselves set an example by engaging in this practice. And under their system, there was no such thing in all the kingdom, for if he had his health, he worked and lacked for nothing. and if he was ill, he received what he needed from the storehouses. Soldiers marveled at the technology and wealth of the Incas, but Roman Catholic priests saw only pagan, from a primitive religion, rites and heathen, not Christian, idols. The goal of the Catholic clergy in Peru was to convert the native people to Christianity. In their desire to stamp out native worship, priests reduced Inca sacred idols and temples to rubble and replaced the Inca heritage with their own. The Spanish clergy had mixed success. The native population hid the locations of many sacred Inca sites and religious treasures, and mingled their traditional polytheism, worship of more than one god, with Roman Catholic practices. Father Bernabe Cobo, 1582 to 1657, a Jesuit priest and missionary, a person sent to a foreign country to promote a religion, wrote the least biased, most accurate account of Inca history by a priest in his book Historia del Nuevo Mundo, the history of the New World. He arrived in Peru in 1599 and travelled extensively throughout that country and northern Bolivia. Cobo was an early historian. Most of his writings were based on library research, utilizing earlier Spanish chroniclers' works, personal observations, and oral information. Still, Cobo compiled a large and relatively accurate catalogue of the Inca Empire. In addition to the Spanish accounts, a few native Andeans wrote histories of the Incas. These chroniclers wrote much later than the Spanish. The best known of these was Juan de Santa Cruz Pachacuti Yamqui Salcamaywa, who wrote a history of Peru in the early 17th century. Another native historian was Inca Diego del Castro Titu Cusi Yupanqui. Titu Cusi wrote 22 volumes on the history of the Incas and their conquest by the Spanish. Using Spanish and Native Americans provides resources that offer a balanced view of Inca history. The Inca Legacy. The list of lessons to be learned from the Inca Empire is long. The civilization thrived even though it did not have a written language, a number system, or one of humanity's greatest inventions: the wheel. Despite these obvious handicaps, the Inca Empire developed and administered a type of government in which it was rare to find a citizen who was hungry, naked, or homeless. Under Inca rule, the sick were generally well cared for, and the elderly could expect to receive tender consideration. All of these events occurred without corruption in a relatively crime-free society. No modern government has provided so completely for its citizens. Although it is difficult for people to understand today, the Inca method of record-keeping using strings and knots, the Khipu, was as effective at keeping statistics as today's powerful computers. Every region, every farm, and every taxpayer appeared in the quipus. The Incas accepted no errors in their records. Inca building technology offers lessons many countries would find valuable today. Inca masons, artisans who practiced masonry, built stone walls in which the face of the wall is designed to fit so tightly that the mortar, the cement that holds the stones together, is hidden. These walls have held up over many centuries and countless earthquakes. Engineers built irrigation ditches, canals and aqueducts, channels for carrying water, that provided fresh water and sanitation to cities at a time when European towns had open sewers that spread disease among the population. Paved roads ran up the Andes Mountains, along cliff edges, over deserts, and through jungles. Many of those roads still exist today. Bridges spanned wide gaps between the mountains that were hundreds of feet deep. They lasted more than 100 years, even though they were made of reeds, leather, and logs. By 1500, the planned city of Cusco had more than 4,000 stone buildings, with sparkling fountains, rock-lined sewers, and large public plazas. The empire combined diverse cultures into one civilization ruled by a single man, the Sapa Inka. Throughout the realm, all citizens were required to learn Quechua, the language of the Incas. Subjects followed the same laws and suffered the same punishments for illegal acts, surprisingly few since the punishment for most crimes was death. A network of administrators, record keepers, and government spies kept the government running smoothly. Corruption, jealousy, and ambition were not common among Inca leaders. From birth to death, most Inca subjects accepted their roles in life and the laws that governed them. Do not be lazy, steal, lie, cheat on your spouse, or murder. The Inca civilization thrived under a simple philosophy: work hard, pay taxes, and want for nothing. The beginning of the empire. Numerous legends exist about the establishment of the Inca Empire by the first Sapa Inka, Manco Capac, and his wife Mama Oclo. These legends are imaginative, creative, and compelling. They also form the basis for the cultural history of the South American country known today as Peru. One legend tells of 4 brothers: Ayar Kachi, Ayar Uchu, Ayar Auka, and Ayar Manco. Their family lived in the cavern of Pacaritambo, a deep cave cut into the Andes Mountains. The 4 brothers and their 4 sisters left their home in search of a better life. The first brother, Ayar Kachi, had mystical powers that made his brothers and sisters jealous. The brothers tricked Ayar Kachi into returning to their cave and then blocked it with stones to prevent him from escaping. The remaining siblings continued on their journey. When they reached Mount Huanacari, Ayar Uchu turned to stone and became a holy shrine, or Huaca, revered by the Inca people. This left Ayar Auka and Ayar Manco. They walked to a small village where Ayar Auka became frightened and fled. He scrambled across the rough landscape until he was exhausted. Then he sat down to rest, and like his brother, he turned to stone. Ayar Manco traveled with his sisters, finally arriving between the Urubamba and Apurimac rivers. Ayar Manco founded the city of Cusco, and the culture that would later become the Incas. Manco selected his sister Mama Oclo as his wife, because she was pleasant and eager to please people. The marriage explains the custom of a Sapa Inka, which is usually marrying his sister. Ayar Manco changed his name to Manco Capac and declared himself the ruler of the new society. Subsequently, the son of the primary wife, known as the Koya, typically inherited the title of Sapa Inka. Sapa Inkas could also have many other secondary wives. The crown did not always go to the firstborn son, but the son of the Koya seemed best suited to become the emperor. Another version of the Inca Empire's beginning involves Manco Capac, Mama Oclo, and the sun god Inti. The tale began as members of 10 clans called Alas in the Inca language, a group of related families. Followed Manco Capac on his journey. Along the way, the sun god gave Manco Capac a golden rod, commanding him to plunge it into the earth when he arrived at a place he thought would suit a settlement. The story says, Manco chose a high plain in the Andes Mountains. He stuck the rod into the ground, and it disappeared. That is where he and his community founded Cusco. Manco Capac erected the Intihuasi temple to pay homage to the sun, which is precisely where the golden rod vanished into the earth. Fathers and mothers have passed down these legends from one generation to the next. Historians accept Manco Capac was the founding father and the first ruler of a clan living in the Andes. The city of Cusco still stands today. However, the exact details of when and how the empire began remain a mystery. Equally mysterious are the many civilizations that thrived in the Andes and the surrounding regions before the Incas came to power. These civilizations contributed to the Inca story because they contributed to the art, culture, political organization, and religious beliefs of the Inca Empire. The names given to these cultures are not necessarily what the people call themselves, because archaeologists name various cultures after the locations where ruins of their civilizations have been found. For example, the Moche culture was a group of people who once lived in the Moche Valley in northern Peru. We recognize pre-Columbian civilizations, before Christopher Columbus arrived in the Americas in 1492, as cultures or horizons. Culture is the beliefs, society, art, and lifestyle of a contained group. A horizon describes cultural beliefs, art, and lifestyles spread over a large region and several diverse ethnic groups. The early cultures that most influenced the Incas include the Chavin Horizon and the Moche, Paracas, Nazca, and Tiahuanaco cultures. These groups existed before Manco Capac founded the Inca Empire, and their artifacts, the objects they made that have been discovered by archaeologists, and technology were evaluated and incorporated into the Inca culture. Since none of these cultures had a written language, archaeologists have estimated the dates and details of each group by examining their artifacts. From 900 to 200 BCE, the people of Chavin thrived in present-day Peru's eastern Cordillera, mountain range, of the Andes. Due to their strategic location along heavily used mountain passes, they dominated trade between the Amazon River region and the Pacific Ocean. Chavin art, beliefs, and social customs spread throughout the Andes through human contact and llama caravans, groups of people traveling together, often traders, packed with chavin, pottery, cloth, and metalwork. This culture believed that the human and animal worlds were closely linked, and that moving between them in myths, traditional stories, often with a magical element, and religious ceremonies was possible. They made religious images with anthropomorphized animals, animals with human forms or personalities, including eagles, falcons, and snakes. Cats posed as humans appear on ceramic drinking vessels, urns, tall, rounded vases, plates, and murals, wall paintings, in temples. The Chavin developed the use of llama and alpaca wool in weaving. They advanced the use of natural dyes and cloth painting, as well as hand-spinning yarn and weaving on special looms braced against the weaver's back. These techniques became standard among the Chavin and were spread by traders among other cultures. By the time the Inca Empire began, Chavin weaving techniques were considered to produce the finest cloth. The Paracas culture. Most of what is known today about the Paracas culture, which began in about 600 BCE, comes from studying a Paracas cemetery in southern Peru, near the city of Ica. The cemetery placed the crouching bodies in large baskets wrapped in cloth. Many of the bodies were wrapped in finely embroidered cotton or wool, featuring designs of mythical creatures, animals, and geometric patterns. The extremely dry air naturally preserved the bodies as mummies. The condition of each mummified body tells much about the culture. For example, the cultures flattened their skulls. Many Native American cultures considered a flat skull a sign of beauty, so they tied a board to the top of infants' heads at birth. The Paracas skulls give anthropologists, people who study human societies, an insight into the cultural beliefs of the Paracas people. Along with the bodies, archaeologists found weapons, gold jewelry and ornaments, feather fans, animal bodies, pottery and gourds. The artifacts provide information about the Paracas burial practices, technology, and art. Scientists know that the Paracas had technology for making cloth, metalwork and ceramics. Because people were buried with many personal items, they assumed that the culture believed in a life after death in which the dead would need weapons, food, and other things. The Nazca culture. Around 200 CE, the Paracas culture gave way to the Nazca civilization. The Nazca people were artists and craftspeople who produced highly polished, decorated ceramics and embroidered complex designs into wool and cotton cloth. They were also known as the Nazca people. The process created remarkable rock patterns on the sandy desert soil. The sheer size of these patterns makes them visible only from aerial perspectives. The stone patterns represent birds, crabs, and flowers. One bird measures 400 feet by 300 feet. 200 meter. The edges of the designs point directly north, south, east, and west. One of the culture's most remarkable skills was weaving. As with the Chavin, Nazca textile technology was passed from mother to daughter. Both cultures had advanced textile technology by the time the Inca Empire came into being. The Nazca people traced this image of a monkey in the sandy desert soil of Peru. It is so big that it is visible only from the air. The Nazca are a people who date back to around 200 CE and lived in what is today known as southern Peru. A Nazca legend tells of Antarqui, a boy who helped the Incas during battles by flying overhead and reporting on enemy soldiers and their archaeologists, who have found Nazca ceramic artifacts that depict flying people. Furthermore, archaeologists found the cloth in Nazca tombs that possessed a weave so tight it could hold clothes, shown to have a tighter weave than the cloth the company used for making modern hot air balloons. Could the Nazca have had the technology to fly? The society tested the possibility of Nazca ballooning by constructing their own balloon, which they named Condor 1. The balloon was made of cotton and wood with a gondola constructed from reeds sourced from Lake Titicaca to hold the passengers. Burning extremely dry wood would produce hot smoke to fill the balloon. On November 23, 1975, American Jim Woodman of the Explorer Society and English balloonist Julian Knott ascended to 380 feet in Condor 1, stayed in the air for several minutes, and then descended safely, thus completing a remarkable piece of experimental archaeology. Of course, this does not prove that the ancient Nazcans did fly, but it indicates that it is a real possibility. The Moche culture. In the Moche and Chicama valleys of Peru, a civilization emerged that lasted roughly 600 years. They are called the Moche culture, a clan that thrived from about 100 to 700. The Moche developed a dominant class of noblemen, including priests and military leaders. They founded the first kingdom of the Andes and united weaker cultures under their king. Like other early American civilizations, the Moche had no written language. However, archaeologists have discovered much about the Moche people's beliefs and practices by examining their ceramics. Pictures on bowls, jars, urns, and plates portray the Moche people in every way. The depictions show Moche doctors operating on brains and mending broken bones. Weavers spin and work their looms. Messengers carry important news along Moche roads, while ancient soldiers use their slingshots and lances, weapons with a powerful point mounted on a wooden pole, to protect their kingdom. Moche pottery also shows pictures of food, boats, houses, farming practices, and common animals such as llamas, pumas, and frogs. The Moche culture employed advanced construction methods for their time. Moche construction methods were advanced for their time. The culture produced many large buildings, usually made of adobe, bricks made of straw and mud and dried in the sun. At Cerro Blanco in Peru, pyramids are a reminder of the Moche culture. The Huaca del Sol, Shrine of the Sun, and the Huaca de la Luna, Shrine of the Moon, were massive temples made of adobe blocks and built on huge temple platforms. The Huaca de la Luna's base measures 750 feet by 450 feet. These pyramids existed when the Incas conquered the people living in the Moche Valley, about 600 years after the Moche civilization disappeared. The ability to make adobe bricks that lasted must have impressed Inca architects. Although later Inca architecture used cut stone, early public buildings and houses for farmers in some regions used adobe bricks. Growing food isn't easy, because the Moche Valley is in the dry desert of northern Peru. The Moche developed advanced agricultural techniques to overcome this problem. They used guano, seabird droppings, and livestock manure to fertilize their fields, and they built aqueducts to carry water for irrigation, bringing water to the fields to help crops grow, and for human use. These techniques were still in use when the Inca Empire began. The Incas quickly recognized that Moche agricultural technology enabled them to grow more food. The use of irrigation and fertilizers reached its height during the Inca days, but the original idea came from the Moche. The Tiahuanaco culture. The Tiahuanaco civilization thrived on the southern shore of Lake Titicaca in present-day Bolivia. The Tiahuanaco's dates of origin vary. Some archaeologists believe the cull began around 1500 BCC result, and others think it was closer to 200. The dates when they disappeared also vary. Estimates range from 600 to 1250, with 1150 being the most likely. The result. This was a culture of architects, people who design buildings, masons, people who work with stone or brick, and advanced building technology. No early South American cultures developed the wheel. Yet these ancient people built massive stone temples, courts, and cities. The Tiahuanaco developed masonry to such a high degree that they could build large stone buildings where the blocks fit together so well that the mortar, or cement, between them is almost invisible. They carved stones to fit one inside the next using copper clamps and tenons, carved joints. By the time the Incas met the Tiahuanacos, their civilization had collapsed. But they were still master builders, and the Inca absorbed their technology. Before the Incas met the Tiwanaku, they did build stone buildings, but their stone structures lacked grandeur. The master masons brought from Lake Titicaca helped improve the quality of Inca stonework. The first Incas. The Inca Empire began with a small group living in crude homes and scrambling for food. They spent their earliest years defending their territory from invading enemy tribes and trying to grow enough crops to feed themselves through droughts and famines. The first 8 Inca rulers focused all their attention on Cusco and its surrounding towns. In the early days, the Inca population was well under 10,000 people, and Cusco under Manco Capac probably had only 500 residents. In the early history of the Incas, it isn't straightforward to separate the myths from the facts. Retelling this history is even more difficult because the Incas had no written language and oral history. Remembering history by telling stories can sometimes change as the story is told repeatedly. Still, there is a story of how the Inca civilization began. The first Inca ruler, Manco Capac, and his wife and sister, Mama Oclo, brought together the small tribes living near Cusco. The tribes formed Ailos, clans, under Manco Capac's guidance. The Ailu system lasted through the 300 years of the Inca Empire. The new city demanded constant attention to ensure the people had the basic elements of life: food, water, clothing, and shelter. The Incas had to build housing, plant crops, hunt, and find safe drinking water. Manco Capac also built a sun temple, Intihuasi, so the Cusco people could honor their main god. Blending the 4 tribes around Cusco was not difficult. The members of these tribes were farmers who had no interest in war. However, neighboring tribes were not as friendly. A significant achievement of Manco Capac's reign was providing a safe, secure home for his people, and an heir to provide continuous leadership. After his death, Manco Capac's son and heir, Sinchi Roca, ruled from roughly 1228 to 1258. Sinchi Roca's first duties were building a palace for himself and his family, servants and guards. The mummy of each Inca ruler remained in his original palace, along with his family and servants. So each new Inca chief had to build a new palace. In addition to building a new palace, improvements needed to be made to the Intihuasi temple, since the original, according to Spanish priest Bernabe Cobo, was of humble and coarse adobe walls. Because, in those rustic times, the people did not have a way to work stone as their descendants did later. The Intihuasi served 2 purposes for the Incas: providing a place to worship and intimidating people of neighboring tribes, who were amazed by the size of the temple. This was particularly true of civilizations that had no formal places to worship. Cusco's location in the Andes Mountains had a short season for growing food and a long winter. The population needed more food, and the Inca ruler ensured they got it. Sinchi Roca had two ideas about how to make more farmland. The first was to build agricultural terraces along the sides of the mountains. The Incas used rocks to create terraces. It took thousands of baskets of soil to fill the terraces, followed by raking, planting, weeding, and watering. Filling the terraces required thousands of baskets of soil, which then needed to be raked, planted, weeded, and watered. Sinchi Roca's other idea was draining the local marsh. The project was even more difficult than building the terraces. Long, sloped channels to drain the water had to be cut into the earth using primitive tools. The open markets established by Loke Yupanqui, the third Inca ruler, were much like today's farmers' markets. Farmers brought crops such as potatoes, corn, and quinoa, a type of grain, to trade with other vendors who offered cloth, leather goods, pottery, and dried and smoked meat or fish. The Incas had no currency, so all purchases were traded for other goods based on the buyers' and sellers' values. 3 such markets existed in Cusco, and the tradition continues. Market Day in Andes mountain towns brings a flurry of activity today as vendors set up stalls and buyers compare produce and goods offered. Many of the products remain the same: woven cloth, leather goods, dried meat or fish, corn, potatoes, medicinal and cooking herbs, and pottery. Buyers can make purchases in cash now, but they can still swap cloth for fish, fish for pots, or pots for potatoes too. These projects meant that Sinchi Roca's son, Loke Yupanqui, the third Inca chief, did not face additional agricultural demands. Instead, his main accomplishments, in addition to building himself a palace, included increasing the size and style of the Intihuasi, creating public markets, building roads, beginning to establish the Inca administrative system, and building the Aclahuasi. The Aclahuasi was the home of the Aclas, or holy or chosen women. It became known as a center of fine weaving, and the cloth produced there was used in religious rites to dress priests and nuns, and for the Inca chief's family. The women also made beer and served as priestesses for religious rites. Since the chosen women were well trained and among the most beautiful women of the empire, many became secondary wives for Inca nobles. As the population grew, Cusco expanded and much of the population moved farther from the center of town. Loke Yupanqui realized that a better means of travel was essential and ordered roads to be built between the suburbs and the center of Cusco. With better travel, the Inca chief and his administrators could continue to keep a closer watch on citizens living at the edge of the empire. Loke Yupanqui began the Inca civil service system to help him manage his subjects. He appointed curacas, men who were professional government employees, to assign work, collect taxes, and oversee government projects, such as building roads and irrigation systems. The Khipu became the foundation of the extensive Inca program to keep track of everything that happened in the empire. Like all occupations under the Incas, the Cuban occupation was hereditary, passed from father to son. The Incas prohibited career changes. Once the roads were built and the curacas were appointed, Loke Yupanqui went on an inspection tour. He believed that a good ruler personally observed how his citizens lived and his administrators worked. Future Inca chiefs followed his example, taking a hands-on approach to governing. Loke Yupanqui passed on his spirit and vision to his heir, Maita Capac, circa 1288 to 1318. This new ruler established a school system among the Inca nobility, encouraged religious tolerance, and conquered the people of Tiahuanaco. Early in his reign, Maita Capac decided that princes needed to learn about government and warfare. The schools he founded offered a limited curriculum that ensured future rulers would be prepared for leadership, and government administrators would understand the general workings of the Inca civil service. The school concept expanded to include sons of the Inca chief's relatives, caracas, and rulers whose tribes or clans had been absorbed into the Inca Empire. At Maita, Capac realized that, unlike some European rulers who forced their subjects to follow the king's religion or face severe punishment, different cultures honored their gods with the same reverence as the Incas. Wanted conquered people to worship the Inca gods, but he also allowed them to follow their personal beliefs. Maita Capac recognized the importance of skilled warriors since the Inca Empire spent a fair amount of time protecting itself from invasion and expanding its territory by conquering others. During his reign, about 1/5 of the population served in the military, although this was not a large number of men. The empire's population was about 1,000, so Maita Capac's army numbered about 200. To increase the efficiency of the military in moving from place to place, Maita Capac improved roads to all the outer regions of the empire. Maita Capac's greatest contribution to the Inca Empire was conquering the Tiahuanacos, a culture of superb architects and masons. The Incas learned and adapted Tiahuanaco's stone cutting, shaping and building skills, and applied that knowledge to making stronger and more beautiful stone buildings. Some people were born to greatness, and others achieved greatness because of their good looks. That was the case with Capac Yupanqui, who was initially not the heir to Maita Capac. Unfortunately, the man who was his heir was too ugly to be the ruler. The Inca chief was believed to be the sun's son, and how could a truly unattractive person represent the sun god? His ugly brother vanished from politics after the populace decided that Capac Yupanqui had made a more attractive king. Capac Yupanqui looked westward toward the Pacific Ocean to expand his empire. Many cultures were along the coast, including powerful warrior states and clans of artisans and craftspeople. Capac Yupanqui prepared his army to move from the higher, colder, wetter Andes to fight on the lower, hotter, drier coast. He continued his expansion plan through conquest, assimilating one culture at a time. Some cultures were pleased to join the Inca Empire, while others fought against the Inca army and lost. Within a few weeks, Capac Yupanqui had conquered the coastal region and brought nearly 120,000 square miles of territory under his rule. Under Capac Yupanqui, the Intihuasi and Aclahuasi became temples of solid stone. Cusco expanded, as it had since the days of Manco Capac, with groves of trees, gardens, public plazas, and recreational areas. His wife, Kusi Hilpay, took an interest in the environment and had forests and gardens planted throughout the empire. Equally important, Capac Yupanqui recognized the growing need for fresh water. He promoted various water projects including bridges, aqueducts, canals, drains, and sewer lines. While the empire flourished under Capac Yupanqui, his household was filled with intrigue and scheming driven by ambition. Capac Yupanqui had many wives. Normally, the primary wife, Kusi Hilpay, would choose the future ruler from the sons of Koya. However, there was jealousy among the wives. Kusi Chimbo wanted her favorite son to be the next ruler. Kusi Hilpay's father was the Curaçao of Anta, a powerful and influential region. Kusi Chimbo, a secondary wife, was jealous of Kusi Hilpay and arranged for Hilpay's son, Quispe Yupanqui, the direct heir to the throne, to be murdered. Capac Yupanqui disappeared at about the same time, and most historians believe he, too, was murdered. Kusi Chimbo's supporters named her son Inca Roca, the new ruler. Inca Roca did not want to suffer the same fate as his father and half-brother. Immediately after taking power, he married Kusi Chimbo, his mother and partner, in the murder of his father and half-brother. In this manner, she ensured that one of her offspring would inherit the throne, thereby preventing her from succumbing to the temptation to murder him. Inca Roca was the most productive of the early Inca chiefs, and the first ruler to use the title Inca. He chose to be called the Sapa Inka, which means unique chief. Inca Roca was interested in road building, city planning, architecture and improving waterworks in the Inca Empire. One of his first efforts was reorganizing the Inca political and social structure. He divided the government administration into upper and lower sections, with all political, military, and social matters under his direct authority. He named several relatives who were in government and social positions. Only the priests of the Inti Huasi were still direct descendants of Manco Capac. Inca Roca finished draining the marshes, a project begun by Sin Chiroca more than 100 years before. He directed the construction of canals to supply ample fresh water to 2 city districts. Additionally, he constructed a reservoir to store fresh water for homes and irrigate crops, expanding the number of fields available for farming. Roads continued to be a major Inca undertaking. The Incas had only 2 means of transportation: by foot or by litter, a small carriage carried by several men. Almost everyone walked, as only Inca nobles and Caracas had the privilege of riding by. The Caracasi used llamas as pack animals to carry loads, but they could only carry about 100 pounds, carry 45 kilograms, making them too small to date humans. Inca Roca's successor, Yahuar Huacac, had none of his father's ambition, vision, or productivity. Instead, he preferred to remain in his palace and enjoy a dull and uneventful reign as Sapa Inka. Legend has it that the kidnapping of Yahuar Huacac, when he was 8 years old, left him psychologically damaged for life. He was considered ineffective, as he did not even arrange to construct his palace. A lace. One Spanish historian, Garcilaso de la Vega, claimed that Yahuar Huacac managed to raise an army of nearly 20,000 men. But this claim by de la Vega is an exaggeration. The population of Cusco at the time was roughly 4,200 people, including many women, children, and men too old to fight. Yahuar Huacac could possibly count 1,000 men suitable for military service. Including recruits from neighboring towns and conquered people, the largest army possible would be about 2,500 soldiers. This limitation was inconsequential, because Yahuar Huacac's army neither engaged in battles nor expanded the empire. Viracocha, the 8th Sapa Inka and Yahuar Huacac's heir, is known for his extreme cowardice. Huiracocha's approach to expanding the empire was to conquer and absorb other cultures, as long as the expansion was not too dangerous or difficult. In many past situations, the victorious Inca army looted the conquered villages, killed civilians, and acted recklessly. Huiracocha did not want to lose the wealth held in conquered towns. He scooped up smaller cultures and incorporated them under his authority, keeping their wealth and using their labor force. One legend claims that after a long military campaign, Huiracocha and his son Urco Inca, his heir, vacationed in the mountains. The Chanca people chose this time to attack the Inca Empire. Huiracocha felt he could no longer rule and gave up his throne to Urco Inca, who could not defeat the Chancas. Another tale says that facing the attack of the Chanca, the father and son both fled out of cowardice. They left Cusco's protection to a younger son of Huiracocha. The story of how Cusi Yupanqui became the military leader of the Inca army, defeated the Chanca and claimed the title Sapa Inka actually began with a vision. According to the writings of Spanish priest Bernabe Cobo, the sun god Inti spoke to young Cusi Yupanqui saying, "Have no fear, for I am your father, the sun. I know you will subjugate, conquer many nations, and take extreme care to honor and remember me in your sacrifices." The sun god then presented images of the lands and people Cusi Yupanqui would conquer. Cusi Yupanqui lived in a time and culture where such visions were taken seriously. As events unfolded, he was able to turn his vision into reality. According to the chronistas, soldiers, clerks, and priests, who wrote detailed accounts of the history, customs, and daily lives of Inca citizens, the legend began as follows. In 1438, Cusco came under attack from the Chancas, a violent, warlike culture much feared by the Incas. To escape capture and possible torture, the Sapa Inka, Huiracocha, and his son and heir, Urco Inca, fled to a stronghold in the Andes Mountains. The trio left the younger son, Kusi Yupanqui, to defend the empire. At this point, fact and fiction mingle. As the Chancas prepared their attack, Kusi Yupanqui dressed in the skins of a puma, an animal the Inca revered for its strength and cunning. Kusi Yupanqui led his soldiers against the Chanca, and, as the legend goes, the sun god Inti caused the stones on the battlefield to rise as warriors and assist Kusi Yupanqui in defeating the dreaded Chancas. The young warrior saved Cusco from defeat and forced his father to step down as ruler. After casting aside his cowardly brother, Kusi Yupanqui declared himself Sapa Inka. From that time on, he was called Pachacuti, the Earthshaker. Inca military might. One of Pachacuti's first projects was a military campaign to expand the empire. He had inherited a well-disciplined and experienced army. Every adult male between the ages of 25 and 50 had military training, and part of the manhood ritual included getting weapons of war as gifts and learning how to use them. A well-equipped warrior wore padded cloth armor and a helmet and carried a spear, a mace, a heavy club with a metal head studded with spikes, a slingshot, and a shield. The military was organized similarly to a modern army. The Incas based their military structure on units of 10. A troop of 10 men had a troop leader like today's corporal. 5 troops of 10 had an officer similar to a sergeant, and units increased accordingly. Officers oversaw groups of 100, 500, 1,000, 5,000, and 10,000 warriors. Like the President of the United States today, the Sapa Inka held the position of Commander-in-Chief of the army. Although most officers were appointed nobles, the military was one area in which commoners could rise through the ranks. An outstanding warrior was rewarded regardless of his societal position. The Incas recognized the value of a continuous supply chain for military operations. Roads stretched to the edges of the Inca Empire, and along the roads were storehouses from which the soldiers were fed, clothed, and armed. In addition, llamas followed the army in caravans carrying additional supplies the warriors might need. The Inca forces employed a simple military strategy, dividing themselves into 3 groups. The first group attacked from the front, while the other 2 circled to attack the rear flanks, sides. If the enemy retreated to a fortress, the Incas cut off all their water, food supplies, and communications, a military strategy called laying siege. According to Albert Marin in his book Inca and Spaniard, Pizarro and the Conquest of Peru, the Inca approached the enemy in mass formations 1,000 strong. As they came within earshot, they set up an ear-splitting racket. Noise boosted their courage and made the enemy jittery. Warriors blew conch-shell trumpets and bone whistles. They shook gourd rattles and beat drums covered with human skin. Men danced wildly, whirling, jumping, and shouting. They boasted of their courage and jeered at the enemy as cowards. Some units bellowed this blood-curdling chant. "We'll drink chicha beer from your skull. With your teeth we'll make a necklace. From your bones, flutes. We take a drum from your skin, and then we will lance." Many enemies gave up before the fighting had even begun. In battle, the Inca army lined up according to which weapon they carried. The first row was skilled with the slingshot and attacked opponents by throwing their smooth stones. Then came the common warriors with spears, stone or metal clubs, and nobles armed with sharp battle axes made of copper. The Incas incorporated the weapons of newly conquered cultures into their army. Bolas, ropes with 3 stones attached, was one such addition. When the bolas were spun around and then hurled, the stones encircled the arms or legs of an enemy, literally tying him up. The bow and arrow were a welcome addition. The Incas. Despite having no archery skills, their subjects from the Amazon region achieved such great accuracy with bows and arrows that they could shoot birds in flight. As Sapa Inka and commander-in-chief of the military, Pachacuti declared that destruction in conquest was unacceptable. He prohibited his soldiers from destroying towns, massacring the enemy, or burning crops. Instead, as he took over an area, Pachacuti enlarged the Inca labor force with farmers, soldiers, artisans, and experienced leaders. The ruler is Pachacuti, Ryle 1438 to 1471, expanded the role of the Sapa Inka, and brought a new sense of organization to continuing Incan conquests. Defeated cultures that declared loyalty to Pachacuti were immediately integrated into the Inca civil system. Those who remained hostile met a brutal fate. Their skulls became drinking vessels, their skins were stretched over military drums, and their bones were carved into flutes. The Sapa Inka approached every conquest by extending a hand of friendship and offering a caravan laden with gifts. His open diplomacy encouraged acceptance of Inca rule, while reducing the costs of lives and supplies consumed by major battles. Pachacuti offered gifts of gold and cloth and guaranteed peace to those who swore their loyalty to the Inca Empire. Not surprisingly, less powerful cultures chose to join the empire rather than die. In 1463, Pachacuti decided to concentrate on administering his now vast empire. He named his son Tupac Yupanqui the new commander-in-chief of the military. Father, son, and grandson Huayna Capac enlarged the Inca Empire for over 4 decades until it stretched roughly 3,400 miles, circa 5,472 kilometers, north to south along the Andes. The Incas controlled all the land from the Pacific Ocean to the eastern foot, hills of the Andes and the Amazon rainforest. Pachacuti was a dictator, but he was also a caring ruler. He understood the need for defeated people to keep their dignity and heritage intact. Otherwise, they would become rebellious. He appreciated the people's basic needs: food, clothing, and shelter. And the civil administration of Papachacuti's sovereign ensured all citizens had these basics. However, Pachacuti was not simply an idealist. His ideas about government came from his understanding of how a ruler controls many conquered people. One way to avoid rebellion was to bring a conquered culture's principal idols, images of their gods, to the Coricancha, the central temple in Cusco, which replaced the Intihuasi. Pachacuti claimed he honored these gods, and the Incas occasionally accepted new gods into their beliefs. However, moving the idols of these gods to Cusco was a symbol that the defeated culture's beliefs were captive. In war, armies brought idols of their primary gods into battle as a safeguard against the enemy. These idols were not merely images, but were believed to have the power of the god they represented. Therefore, capturing an army's idol automatically resulted in their defeat. Once Pachacuti held a culture's idols in Cusco, its people would not dare rebel, because Pachacuti would order the idols to be destroyed. In the same way, Pachacuti ensured loyalty among the leaders of a conquered culture by providing them with an education. The former leaders continued to govern their people while their sons went to Cusco to study and learn Inca customs. Education ensured an excellent future for the heirs and made them value Inca culture. The sons were also hostages of Pachacuti, who would not have hesitated to execute them if their fathers rebelled. The land of the Four Quarters. As the empire expanded, the land under the Sapa Inka's rule became called the Land of the Four Quarters, or Tahuantinsuyu. The quarters, Chichaisuyu, north, Antisuyu, east, Kolasuyu, south, and Kuntisuyu, west, were distinctly different in region, climate, earlier civilizations, and agriculture. Cusco, the government's and religion's capital, stood at the heart of the empire. In the land of the Incas, all roads led to Cusco. On a modern map of South America, Tahuantinsuyu would include Ecuador and the southern section of Colombia, portions of Bolivia, Argentina and Chile, and most of Peru. Each quarter had its capital, dress style, crops, languages, art forms and religious beliefs. Yet all obeyed the laws and cultural patterns of Inca life. Each region had government administrators to assign work, enforce the peace, collect taxes, and oversee the welfare of the people. Each quarter was under the guidance of an apu or regional head. Below the apus were several layers of Caracas, men who oversaw large groups of households. The Inca Empire based its rule on units of 10, so every group of 10 households had a leader. Groups of 50 households reported to a higher-ranking foreman, and so on up the line. Prefects, chief officers, watched over increasingly larger groups, 100, 500, 1,000, 5,000, and 10,000 households. As the empire grew, Pachacuti realized that he did not have enough Capac Incas, nobles who were directly descended from Manco Capac, the founder of the Inca Empire, to administer his government. To fill in the gaps, Pachacuti began a new level of nobles, Hahua Incas, who were nobles appointed to their rank by the Sapa Inka. The Sapa Inka could appoint men who had served them well, leaders from conquered cultures, and military officers to the noble rank of Hahua Inka. The Inca Empire changed its borders under various Sapa Incas, but its heart was always in the Andes Mountains of South America. At times, minor rebellions needed to be suppressed. Pachacuti used a concept called minima to eliminate dissent. The term mitima refers to a settlement. Mitima broke up with the rebels, yet did not deprive the village of needed services, since loyal Inca workers moved in to replace them, and maintain normal productivity. Some agricultural groups also used mitima as their home. In several cases, villages designated for resettlement were moved to places the Inca wanted to rework and develop, such as the terraced maize fields in Cochabamba. Climate and agriculture. The Inca Empire began and expanded high in the Andes Mountains. The mountains form three distinct ranges: the Cordillera Oriental to the east, the Cordillera Occidental to the west, and the Cordillera Central. Broad, sweeping valleys, carved by the region's rivers and streams, spread between the mountain ranges. These mountain streams are the source of South America's three great river systems: the Amazon, which flows through Peru and Brazil, the Orinoco of Colombia and Venezuela, and the Parana-Paraguay-Uruguay river system. The region is divided into four distinct climate zones: the Yungas, the Quechua, the Suni, and the Puna. Each zone supports different plants and animals, although some species can survive in several zones. Like the Inca, today, people cope with extreme climate changes and high altitudes. The Yungas zone rises up to 5,000 feet from the Andes foothills. It incorporates the western foothills and is generally warmer and drier than other Andes regions. In this zone, the Incas built raised fields, crisscrossed with irrigation ditches that enabled them to bring water to the fields, increasing crop yields. In its natural state, the Yung is a semi-arid, receiving low annual rainfall grassland with low shrubs, cactus and grasses. However, civilizations that existed long before the Incas cleared the land for agriculture. Corn, potatoes, beans, fruit, and grain, the main crops of the Inca culture, continue to provide food for today's Peruvian farmers. The Quechua zone begins where the Yungas end, rising from about 5,000 to 11,500 feet. Early cultures transformed the forests into farmland in the Quechua zone. The region has moderate temperatures and enough rainfall. Common crops in Quechua are the same today as in the Inca days. Many varieties of corn and potatoes, quinoa, a plant grown for its seeds, amaranth, a type of grain, squash, lima beans, and fruit. Above the Quechua zone lies the Suni, soaring more than 11,500 feet, (3.51 kilometers), above sea level. High mountain valleys once supported vast grasslands cleared for planting high-altitude crops. Common crops in the sun include corn, potatoes, osea, a root vegetable, grains, and other hardy crops. As in Inca days, natives in the sun herd llamas and alpacas today. Temperatures are far colder in the sun than in the lower zones. Soaring above the sun is the puna, a cold zone where few crops grow. In the east, the Andes drop into the dense Amazon rainforest, where the land has changed little since the days of Inca rule. Inca farmers knew how to grow high-altitude crops in regions with limited rainfall. In the dense tropical atmosphere of the Amazon, however, rain fell inches at a time, and rivers flooded their banks. The Incas hated the climate. The Incas used some of this land to grow coca, a medicinal herb that improved stamina and reduced pain. The jungle was so hot and wet for the Incas that being sent to the coca fields was considered a terrible punishment. However, the region produced various unusual fruits and vegetables prized by the Incas. Manioc, root vegetable, sweet potatoes, avocados, guavas, and pineapples. These foods still form the main diet for many of the groups of native peoples who live in the Amazon region. Toward the southern end of the empire, the mountains fall away into sweeping grasslands called pampas, much like the tallgrass prairies of North America. The grasses in this region send roots several feet into the soil. Inca farmers had only primitive wooden plows, operated by forcing the blade into the soil with the foot. With just these foot plows, Inca farmers had considerable difficulty cutting through the thick native grasses to clear land for crops. Thus, the most densely packed grasslands remained intact and continue to thrive today as one of the world's most valued natural grassland ecosystems. The western quarter lay along the South American coast. It is an odd place where the world's desert, the Atacama, is next to the world's ocean, the Pacific. The region is south of the equator, so winds blow east to west. Rain clouds travel from the Brazilian and Argentinian coasts toward the Andes Mountains to the west, dumping rainfall on the dense tropical forests. Farther west, the mountains block rainfall from the western desert regions, leaving a desert so dry that even cacti cannot survive, and corpses dehydrate into natural mummies. Small rivers such as the Tambo, Ica, and Santa cut fertile valleys through the dry western region. The rivers served as the lifeblood for cultures settling in the area. By 3000 BCE, people had cleared forests to expand farmland. Extensive farming began long before the Incas ruled the region. When an empire expands to the size of the Inca Empire, there can be communication problems. To overcome this problem, Pachacuti ordered everyone under his rule to know how to speak Quechua. They could continue speaking their own language in their everyday lives as long as the language of the Incas. Children began learning Quechua at birth. Within a short time, all Inca citizens could speak with one another regardless of background or rank. Roughly 15,000 miles, 24,140 kilometers of roads connected the various districts of the empire. The Inca culture established a system of runners called casques to keep communications open between each region. These runners were stationed at short distances along the roads. The chasqui were trained to memorize and deliver messages exactly as they were given. The runners traveled day and night, so a message could be sent from the farthest reaches of the empire, more than 2,000 miles, circa 3,219 kilometers, and arrive in Cusco in about a week. This is about the same amount of time it takes a letter to travel 3,000 miles, ca 4,828 kilometers by today's modern postal service. Once Pachacuti turned over military leadership to his son Tupac Yupanqui, he dedicated his time to rebuilding Cusco. He wanted the city to stand as a symbol of Inca power and skill. and imagined it becoming a model of architecture, planning, and construction. Building projects were difficult for the workers, since the city is about 11,680 feet, 3.56 kilometers above sea level. The higher up in the mountains.
This episode is brought to you by Fox One. Watch all 104 matches of the FIFA World Cup live in 4K for just $19.99 a month, with 3 days free. Build your own multi-view, choose up to 3 streams, and follow player spotlights. Stay on top of every moment with live stats, highlights, and instant replays. The FIFA World Cup, streaming live on Fox One. Offers are subject to change. See fox.com for complete terms and conditions.
The less oxygen in the air, making breathing difficult. The winters are cold, and stone construction requires millions of hours of work. By the time the Spanish arrived in 1532, Cusco Center included about 4,000 solidly built stone structures, with much of that work accomplished in just 60 years. The city plan took the shape of a puma, an animal much admired by the Inca culture for its strength and cunning. Photos taken from airplanes still depict Cusco's puma shape. Pachacuti constructed the fortress temple of Sa, human, at the puma's seat. In the center, royal palaces and huge public plazas took shape. Homes for nobles and the central temple, the Coricancha, were situated at the tail of the structure. The city had a complex sewer and water system built with stone-lined trenches. Fresh water was drawn from nearby rivers, the Huatanay and the Tulamayo, that Inca engineers had diverted by building canals. Engineers also built wells for hot springs beneath the earth to provide hot baths for royalty. The citadel, a high fortress of Sacsayhuaman, provided protection in several ways. It stood on a hill from which guards could see long distances. In case of an attack from any direction, guards warned citizens, who then moved into the fortress. The fortress had 3 major towers, one for the Sapa Inka and the other 2 for the military. Sacsayhuaman got fresh water from underground streams and stored enough food and clothing to make a siege of the fortress useless. Sacsayhuaman was also a temple for prayer and sacrifices. The earlier Sapa Incas built the Intihuasi, which the Coricancha replaced. The main temple, dedicated to the sun god Inti, was literally wallpapered with sheets of gold, the seat of the sun, and the roof was made of a blend of golden straw, natural reeds, grasses, and stems. There were 6 buildings, with the other buildings set up as temples to the Inca's main gods: the moon, stars, thunder, lightning, and rainbows. The main temple hosted daily services and sacrifices to the gods. Only priests and nobility could enter the Coricancha. The Aclahuasi, the House of the Aclas, and the school for young men were also located in the city center near the Coricancha. Guarded gates controlled entrances to Cusco, and no one could enter the city between sunset and sunrise. The Sapa Inka, his family, servants, and the households of past Sapa Incas reserved the city center, where the palaces were located. However, when major religious events occurred, nobles and peasants filled the central plazas across from the palace to watch. The city was a masterpiece of design, innovation, and planning. It had 3 primary districts: urban, suburban, and rural. A garden forest separated the urban center from the outlying suburban towns. Neighborhoods or districts divided the urban area, where ethnic groups, such as conquered people from the west or north, lived in specific areas for them. Their clothing distinguished them from people of other districts, since no one was allowed to wear the clothes or headgear of any other ethnic group. This way, guards knew who belonged in which district and closely watched citizens' movements. Laws prevented people from moving from their designated area to another ethnic district. Suburban towns, evenly spaced about 6 miles apart, provided homes for farmers, miners, and other workers. Roads connected each town to its neighboring villages and to the city center. In his book, Inca and Spaniard, Historian Albert Marin describes the city. Cusco was laid out in a giant checkerboard. Its streets were narrow and paved with stone. In addition, 4 main roads, one for each of the empire's quarters, began at Joy Square, an open space of 20 acres at the city's center. The House of Learning and the palaces of the Sapa Inkas, living and dead, surrounded Joy Square on 3 sides. These buildings, made of stone blocks weighing 20 tons, were engineering marvels, a luxurious lifestyle. Although Pachacuti was a talented and wise ruler, he was still as arrogant and privileged as any king. He never walked anywhere. Instead, he traveled in a litter decorated with gold and gems and carried by more than a dozen servants. Other servants led the litter, smoothing the path to prevent jostling for the Inca ruler during his travels. When he ate, his food was served on gold or silver plates, and since he did almost nothing for himself, his secondary wives, or concubines, fed him. They even collected his spit in their hands. People mine gold in various Andean locations every year and pour it into Cusco. It was used to decorate the Coricancha and Sapa Inka palaces. In Cusco, skilled goldsmiths and artisans turned the gold into plates, utensils, bowls, statues, jewelry, and other objects. Despite the vast amounts of gold, the Incas did not place the highest value on precious metals or gemstones. They valued cloth above gold and jewels because of the work of producing truly fine cloth. They valued the cloth so highly that they never cut it. The clothing had armholes and head openings in the design. The finer the fabric, the greater its value. The government accepted fine weaving as a tax payment. It used the cloth given in taxes to pay the military. Women spun thread and wove daily, even using their spare time, such as when walking from their homes to the fields, to spin yarn. Weaving was done on a backstrap loom attached to the body. A loom has a warp, the vertical threads, and a weft, the horizontal threads. With a backstrap loom, warp threads are tight between an anchor, a door or tree, for example, or another person, and the weaver's body. We refer to the body anchor as a backstrap. The weaver uses a shuttle to run the weft threads over and under the warp threads, working from the body forward. Thus, the length of the weaver's arms limited the fabric produced. The cloth was never longer than the arms of the woman who wove it. Some men, and religious women, became expert weavers. The government hired them to weave cloth for gifts, or to negotiate an enemy's surrender. Cloth became an important part of the religious rituals performed by the Inca gods. Daily, yards of fine-quality cloth were burned on the altars of Inti, the sun god. The Inca ruler wore a complicated woven tunic, a loose garment that usually reached the wearer's knees, of cumbia, a vicuña wool fabric made from a wild relative of the llama and worn only by nobles. He wore a lautu, a braided crown with tassels and feathers on his head. Thus, dressed and seated on a gold stool, the Sapa Inka received people who wanted to speak with him. No person dared look into the face of the Sapa Inka because he was considered divine and the son of the sun, and to look directly at him was unacceptable. Even the highest noble approached the Inca in a crouch, with a bundle on his back. This bundle could be small or large, and represented that the approaching person did not consider himself equal to the Sapa Inka. Tupac Yupanqui. When Pachacuti died in 1471, his son Tupac Yupanqui became the next Sapa Inka. Tupac Yupanqui had already established himself as a skilled military leader. In 1460, while his father was still Sapa Inka, he conquered the Khipu people. This culture lived in the Moche Valley from 1300 to 1460. As they had done with many earlier cultures, the Incas absorbed the best of what the Khipu had to offer. The Khipu were artisans who worked with gold, silver, turquoise, and lapis lazuli, a precious blue stone. In a Khipu city, nearly 1/3 of the citizens may have been craftspeople producing complex beaded collars, gold masks, crowns set with gems, religious images, jeweled plates and utensils, and personal jewelry for nobles. Goldsmiths and silversmiths knew how to create alloys, blends of various metals, and use heat to fuse metal parts. Artists created brilliant mosaics, pictures made with pieces of colored tile, to decorate city buildings. The Khipu city of Chan Chan was the largest in pre-modern South America. Architects designed the city around 10 quadrangles, 4-sided open spaces, each featuring homes, workshops, storehouses, gardens, and reservoirs. Khipu forts, staffed by experienced warriors, defended the kingdom's roads. The culture supported a powerful military state with only one flaw. The Khipu depended on aqueducts to carry water to irrigate their land. When Tupac Yupanqui led Inca warriors against the Khipu in 1460, the Incas attacked by cutting off the water supply. The Khipu surrendered, and the Incas took over. Tupac Yupanqui added Khipu artists and craftspeople to the Inca labor force. As Sapa Inka, Tupac Yupanqui had many of the same leadership skills and vision as his father. His name, the Unforgettable, Table 1, represents his ability on the battlefield and as a government leader. Tupac Yupanqui was a merciless, brutal warrior. Albert Marin writes in his book, Inca and Spaniard, Pizarro and the Conquest of Peru. When the coastal city of Huaco resisted too long, he decided to make an example of those who defied him. He promised the Huacans fair treatment in return for their surrender. But as they left the safety of their walls, he attacked. Thousands were killed on the spot or hung from the walls. Piles of their bleached bones littered the ground for generations. After a short 22-year reign, Tupac Yupanqui died in 1493. After his death, several possible leaders emerged, along with a period of fighting that ended when Huayna Capac, one of Tupac Yupanqui's sons, took charge and declared himself Sapa Inka. In 1653, historian and Inca chronista Father Bernabé Cobo, in his History of the New World, described Huayna Capac as an able and popular leader. He was much loved by his vassals and held to be valiant and firm. He achieved many renowned victories. He broadened the borders of his empire with many provinces that he added to it. He showed himself as prudent in government as he was vigorous at arms. The Inca Empire reached its largest size under the leadership of Huayna Capac. He led his army in conquering the Chachapoyas and Cayambes tribes of present-day Ecuador, even though both tribes had reputations for brutality and savage war tactics. Unlike his grandfather, Pachacuti and Huayna Capac thought they could divide the empire and rule from two capitals. He planned to make Quito, in modern Ecuador, a northern capital equal to Cusco in all ways. This plan was a mistake, eventually leading to the end of Inca rule in the Andes. While he was in the northern capital of Quito, Inca ruler Huayna Capac heard about strange people who had come to his land. They were white men with dark hair and beards. Since beards were rare among natives of the Andes Mountains, facial hair must have seemed bizarre to the Incas. The men were described accurately as wearing hats and vests of metal, European-style armor, riding upon large beasts, horses, and carrying weapons unknown to the Incas. The news frightened Huayna Capac, who believed in omens, signs or events that tell the future, and fortunes. He recalled seeing omens in the sky that predicted a major disaster for the Incas. The priest who had read the omens warned that the empire, its religion, and its laws would die. Huayna Capac believed that the arrival of these strangers to his land fulfilled this omen. He never actually met any Spaniards in person, but in 1525 he died from one of the things the Spanish brought with them, the deadly disease smallpox. From 1518 to 1527, Smallpox swept across the Caribbean and Central America and headed south toward the Inca Empire. Up to this point, the Inca Empire had been somewhat isolated. They had been assimilating, taking in and absorbing neighboring cultures, but never ventured far beyond the Inca borders. When smallpox came, the Inca people were astounded. They had no immunity, medicine, or knowledge of the disease's cause. The disease first arrived in Cusco and was likely introduced by European explorers or traders. Within a short time, smallpox spread throughout the empire, leaving thousands dead. Huayna Capac became so sick that he was not thinking clearly, and he named his infant son Ninan, his heir to the throne. Considering Ninan's age, it would have been impossible for him to rule. But in any case, the heir contracted smallpox too, and died in 1525, just a few days after his father. The event left two of Huayna Capac's other sons, Atahualpa and Huascar, fighting over who would be the next Sapa Inka. The Inca Empire, once a mighty power, was now struggling through a civil war. Huascar and Atahualpa claimed the throne and were ready to fight for it. Huascar made the first move by sending his army to confront Atahualpa's troops. 4 captains led Huascar's imperial army: Hango, Atok, Aguapante, and Cuxi Yupanque. After the first major battle, Hango and Atok lay dead on the battlefield. They had captured Cuxi Yupanque while Aguapante managed to escape. They captured and imprisoned him, but he managed to escape once more. The loss of his younger brother enraged Huascar. He declared Atahualpa Auca a treasonous enemy, and immediately sent a larger army of 15,000 to attack. The battles swung back and forth. Atahualpa and his men defeated each of Huascar's increasingly larger armies. Finally, Huascar went to war with a massive army, only to suffer the same defeat. Atahualpa's army was far too experienced for Huascar. As the new self-appointed king, Atahualpa revealed his true nature. He pretended that he wished to return Huascar to the throne and called the Capac Incas, nobles who were directly descended from Manco Capac, the first Sapa Inka, to Cusco for the event. These nobles were the empire's military leaders, governors, and administrators. Most were loyal to Huascar because they were his direct relatives. They belonged to a closely knit group called a Panaka. Everyone arrived in Cusco on the scheduled date except some individuals. Few people continued to mistrust this prince, according to chronista Garcilaso de la Vega. And when they were all gathered together, Atahualpa gave orders that every last one of them should be put to death. For, in reality, it was in this way that he intended to make sure that the future would be his. Thus, Atahualpa eliminated any possible rivals for the title of Sapa Inka. Atahualpa also burned the mummy of the panacea's ancestor, Tupac Yupanqui. Inca subjects worshipped the mummies of former Sapa Incas as gods. After all, a Sapa Inka was a son of the sun, or a living god. Thus, by destroying the mummy and the principal leaders of the panacea, Atahualpa destroyed any hope the panacea may have had of rising up against him in the future. When the Spanish arrived in 1527, they did not have to spend much time conquering the Inca Empire. The civil war had divided the empire and created chaos. No one was certain who the Sapa Inka was. The political, administrative, and military systems of the Inca Empire, which relied on clear instructions from the Sapa Inka, were unable to respond effectively when the Spanish attacked. The conquistadors. As the Spanish conquistadors, conquerors, spread across North and South America, the region they called the New World, they caused destruction and death. They came to get gold, and they did not mind stealing it from Native American cultures. In 1521, the Spanish destroyed the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan in present-day Mexico. Piles of Aztec gold made the conquistador Hernán Cortés a rich man. Other conquistadors grew bitter with jealousy and greed. Among the Spaniards seeking fame and fortune were Francisco Pizarro, circa 1475 to 1541, the illegitimate son of an army captain, and Diego de Almagro, 1475 to 1538, who became Pizarro's financial partner. In 1524, the pair explored southward in search of gold and gems. The trip was a terrible failure. The expedition of about 80 men slogged through dense mangrove swamps, suffered from countless insect attacks, and quickly dismissed any thought that the land south of Panama, the most southern country of Central America, offered wealth worth having. Despite their failure, the partners funded a second voyage, drawn by the promise of finding gold. Pizarro and Almagro set sail in November 1526 with 2 ships and 160 men bound for the San Juan River in modern-day Colombia. At some point, Almagro returned to Panama for additional supplies and men, while Pizarro and his men camped at the river's edge. While Almagro was away, the first encounter with native people took place. Pizarro's pilot, Ruiz, spotted a large raft sailing on the river with a crew of 20 sailors and several passengers. The encounter sparked the Spaniards' interest because the people wore fine clothes and elegant gold and silver jewelry. They saw drinking vessels encrusted with gems, silver mirrors, and finely woven and embroidered cotton and wool cloth. By using hand signals, the traders explained that the gold and gems came from a land far to the south. The traders dazzled the Spanish. In mid-1527, Pizarro and his men camped once more in a location buzzing with biting insects, the Isla del Gallo, or Isle of the Rooster. The situation grew increasingly desperate because food was scarce. The sun burned the soldiers' skin, and many became sick with disease. Poisonous snakes infested the swampy camp, and the starving men ate them, contributing to their ill health. Pizarro kept his men together by encouraging them to fish, hunt, and gather fruit and berries. Pizarro was an able, experienced soldier, but he could also be very cruel. Pizarro had tortured and burned local chiefs to get those men to reveal where they kept the tribe's gold, silver, and gems, but they would reveal nothing. By August 1527, a handful of Pizarro's men were dying every week. The few who survived were eager to give up any promise of future wealth and return to Panama. Many prepared to overthrow their captain, but Pizarro would not give up his search for riches. Historian Carmen Bernand writes in his book, The Incas, People of the Sun, that Pizarro drew a line in the sand with his sword, saying, "Comrades and friends, on this side lie poverty, hunger, effort, torrential rains, and privation. On that side lies pleasure. On this side, we return to Panama and poverty. On that side, we become rich." 13 chose to follow Pizarro's path to promised wealth. The rest returned to Panama, taking the sailing ship with them. For 7 months, Pizarro's men had little to eat, endured the terrible heat, and suffered from the diseases malaria and dysentery. They did not know that farther to the south, the Inca Empire had greater wealth in gold, silver, and gems than any of them had seen before. Pizarro's partner, Almagro, finally sent a ship to pick up Pizarro and the remaining members of his group. Pizarro was desperate to see the land of riches described to him by local people and the traders on the raft. So he decided they were not ready yet to sail to Panama. Instead, they would sail south. The townspeople were amazed when the Spanish ship arrived at the coastal village of Tumbes, near today's Ecuadorian border. They had never before seen a ship or people like this. The Spanish came with horses. The Inca had never seen those animals. The Spaniards were treated as honored guests. The local curacao, a government employee, sent a message to Huascar, one of the 2 brothers fighting to become Sapa Inka, telling him that strangers had arrived in the Inca land. Capture Cajamarca. The empire was in a civil war when Pizarro arrived in Tumbes in 1528. Pizarro, who had come with only a small force, decided to head north again, leaving the brothers Huáscar and Atahualpa to their dispute. In 1531, Pizarro returned to Tumbes. This time he had more soldiers, horses and weapons. This larger force numbered fewer than 160 men, but Pizarro believed this was all he needed. While Pizarro wisely waited, Huáscar and Atahualpa destroyed each other's armies. Pizarro made his way to the northern Inca Empire city of Cajamarca in 1532. Atahualpa had assumed the throne and established his camp on a nearby hill. This was Pizarro's opportunity to meet the Sapa Inka. He waited all day in the city for Atahualpa to arrive. As the sun set, Atahualpa left his hilltop camp. Some historians claim that Atahualpa believed that the magic of the strangers, their arquebuses, guns, would not work at night, so he waited until then for the meeting. Atahualpa arrived and carried on a gold and silver glitter set with jewels. A dozen servants went before him, sweeping the road to ensure no pebble would bump their lord's journey. Troops stood in the main plaza around the Sapa Inka, singing songs that honored their leader. The Spaniards waited until one of Atahualpa's captains signaled for them to approach the Sapa Inka. Pizarro and a Spanish priest named Fra Vicente de Valverde did so. The priest carried a Bible and a crucifix in one hand. In his book, The Conquest of Peru, Francisco de Xeres, Pizarro's secretary, wrote that the priest said, "I am a priest of God, and I teach Christians the things of God, and in like manner I come to teach you. I teach what God says to us in this book." Atahualpa looked at the book, but the contents meant nothing to him. The Inca had no written language, so the book idea was foreign to him. Atahualpa threw the Bible away, telling the priest that he knew about the Spaniards and how they had taken food and cloth from Inca warehouses and treated Inca chiefs with contempt. Atahualpa ordered the Spanish to return all they had taken and refused to leave the plaza until it was done. Pizarro swiftly decided to launch an attack on Atahualpa. He wore his armor and raised his sword and dagger, a fighting knife. Although Atahualpa had over 1,000 soldiers standing by, Pizarro and 4 brave soldiers advanced to Atahualpa's litter on horseback. The Incas found horses, which were not native to the Americas, to be strange and wondrous beasts, causing the Inca guard to retreat when the Spaniards charged. They killed the guard surrounding Atahualpa and captured the Sapa Inka. Atahualpa's army, with no one at the top to give orders, did not make a move. Pizarro and his men were able to take the city unopposed. Pizarro then told Atahualpa not to be humiliated by losing to a troop of only 5 men. He boasted that he, Pizarro, had conquered greater kingdoms than the Inca Empire with just 5 men, which was not true. He explained that the Christian god he followed supported Pizarro in his desire to convert the Incas to Christianity. According to Xeres, Pizarro said, "Our Lord permitted that your pride should be brought low, and that no Indian should be able to offend a Christian." Pizarro then demanded a ransom of enough gold to fill a storeroom in the building where Atahualpa was being held. Atahualpa insulted that the ransom should be so small, and claimed that he would give even more gold to his captors if it purchased his freedom. After all, what was gold to the Incas? They valued cloth far more than any metal because of the work involved in producing it. While Pizarro held Atahualpa captive, Atahualpa's men continued to hold Huáscar. Atahualpa learned through his jailers that Huáscar promised the Spaniards even more gold, silver. Historians say the imprisoned Huáscar realized his brother's captains had orders to execute him. Just before he died in 1532, Huáscar said, "I was lord and master of this land for only a very short time, but my traitorous brother, upon whose orders I shall soon die, although I am his legitimate lord, will wield the power he usurped for an even shorter time than I did, as quoted in the Inkas, the royal commentaries of the Inca, Garcilaso de la Vega. Huascar's last words were true. Atahualpa, indeed, enjoyed only a brief reign. With Huascar out of the way, Atahualpa expected to pay his ransom, regain his throne, and kill all the Spaniards. Cronista Juan de Betanzos said in Narrative of the Incas, Atahualpa gathered, or caused the amassing of all the gold and silver that he had promised. And as he gathered it, the Marquez nobleman, not to allow any of his men to damage or destroy any piece of gold or silver that he placed there or caused to be gathered. Atahualpa's intention must have been to unleash such a war when he was freed, that he would once again see his gold and silver items. However, once the treasure was safely in Pizarro's hands, the Spaniard did not release his captive. Pizarro finally had enough gold and silver to make him a rich man. However, after Pizarro and his men had suffered near starvation, insects, disease, and discomfort, his former partner Almagro arrived just in time to collect his portion of the wealth. In 1533, the treasure was divided, and King Charles I's, R. 1516 to 1556 share was sent back to Spain with Hernando Pizarro, half-brother of Francisco Pizarro. Atahualpa was all that remained between Francisco Pizarro and the complete conquest of the Inca Empire. Atahualpa himself had aided the Spaniards by slaughtering anyone else who might have become king, and by having his brother executed. With so much to gain, the Spaniards could not resist taking everything. Almagro and Francisco Pizarro accused Atahualpa of stealing the throne from his brother, causing the death of the legitimate Inca ruler, making unfair wars against others, causing the deaths of many Inca subjects, having several wives and taking for himself riches that belonged to the Inca Empire. They conducted a trial, judging him based on Spanish, not Inca law. Atahualpa was found guilty of all charges and condemned to death by burning at the stake. In his book, The Incas, People of the Sun, historian Carmen Bernand describes the shock of the sentence and Atahualpa's reaction. One cannot imagine a more cruel sentence. The Incas had an absolute terror of cremation because it caused the body to disappear. So Atahualpa agreed to convert to Catholicism on the condition that he have his head cut off instead. Atahualpa converted to Roman Catholicism and was renamed Juan de Atahualpa. Then they strangled Atahualpa, the last Sapa Inka, to death. A group of Spaniards who never numbered more than 200 men took over an empire with thousands of subjects. By 1535, the Spanish had placed Manco Inca, 1516 to 1544, another son of Sapa Inka Huayna Capac, on the Inca throne. But he held no real power and did what the Spanish told him. Meanwhile, Pizarro formed a relationship with the Inca princess Inés Yupanqui, sister of Atahualpa. Pizarro never officially married Inés, but they had a daughter named Beatriz. After Pizarro died, Inés married the cronista Juan de Betanzos. Manco Inca remained in Cusco, where the Inca subjects believed incorrectly that he held power. King Charles V was thrilled by the amount of gold he received in Spain. He rewarded Pizarro and Almagro by dividing the Inca Empire between them. Pizarro received the northern half and Almagro got the south, including Cusco. Pizarro's share of the Inca wealth made him a wealthy man. His power enabled him to confiscate Inca land and riches without fear of punishment. Pizarro headed west, where he built a new city at the mouth of the Rimac River. He named this city Ciudad de los Reyes, Spanish for City of the Kings. But it soon came to be called Lima. The city's layout was basic: a series of relatively straight streets that formed more than 100 rectangular city blocks. In Cusco, Almagro planned an expedition to investigate his lands in Chile. Almagro departed in 1535 and remained absent for 2 years. Manco Inca sent 12,000 Incas to accompany Almagro on his trip. During that time, Pizarro's two half-brothers, Gonzalo and Hernando, decided that the three brothers should have the remaining riches in Cusco. Gonzalo and Hernando Pizarro disliked Almagro. And with Almagro and 12,000 Incas gone, it was easy for the Pizarro brothers to take whatever they wanted. Cusco was filled with Spanish soldiers, which enabled the Pizarro brothers to steal with no fear of any consequences from the Incas. The Spanish looted the Sapa Inka's palace, an act that Francisco Pizarro allowed to go unpunished. Gonzalo then desired Manco Inca's wife, Curo Oclo. He demanded that Manco Inca hand her over. Instead, Manco Inca presented one of his sisters to Gonzalo, claiming she was Curo Oclo. The Incas, led by Manco Inca, staged an uprising but were doomed to failure. They had more soldiers than the Spanish, but they had more advanced weapons. Manco Inca escaped and headed for the rainforest to the east of Cusco, where he ended up in the remote village of Vilcabamba. Gonzalo Pizarro pursued him for more than 2 months without success, then returned to Cusco, ransacked the town, and had the real Curo Oclo killed. Gonzalo placed her body in a floating basket and sent it down the Urubamba River. Gonzalo was certain that Manco Inca's men would find the body. Then, the Sapa Inka's desire for revenge would draw him out of his hiding place. But this plan did not work. In 1539, Almagro returned from his expedition to Chile to find his territory in ruins. Cusco had been robbed by the Pizarros. Many Incas had died. A siege of Cusco left thousands either dead or weak from starvation. Almagro and his supporters met the Pizarros in battle. Hernando Pizarro, who had long hated Almagro, ordered his enemy killed. Almagro's death left Cusco and his other holdings without an owner. The Pizarros grabbed them. Continued Inca attacks frustrated Spanish efforts to bring the Inca citizens back under control. In his article, Tupac Amaru, The Lifetimes and Execution of the Last Inca, historian James Q. Jacobs writes, 7 of Almagro's followers were given refuge by Manco Capac. In 1544, these 7 assassinated Manco Inca, their host and protector for 2 years, by stabbing him in the back while playing horseshoes. Meanwhile, Hernando Pizarro had to answer questions about what he and his family had done in Peru. Although King Charles V overlooked much of what the Pizarros had done to the Incas, he could not excuse the execution of Almagro. Hernando Pizarro returned to Spain disgraced, where he spent 22 years in prison. On June 1541, several of Almagro's loyal men broke into Pizarro's official residence and executed him. The Roman Catholic Church of Santo Domingo stands on the site of the Coricancha in Cusco. It retains many Inca features, including the lower walls. Spanish dominion. By the 1540s, the Spanish were firmly in charge in Peru. Efforts to get rid of the conquistadors were not successful. By 1572, the last outpost of the Inca Empire, Vilcabamba, fell into ruin. The Spanish king, Philip II, gave his favorite nobles land and titles in Peru. Under the encomienda system, a Spanish landowner collected taxes from the people who worked the land. In return, landowners promised protection from attack. But since the Spanish were the only people who might attack, paying them for protection was a joke. The Roman Catholic Church sent missionaries to convert the heathens to Christianity. Priests and friars destroyed Inca idols recklessly in an attempt to eliminate all signs of idol worship. The people soon learned to hide their knowledge of huacas, Inca holy sites usually found in nature, temples and religious rituals, so the priests would not destroy them. The priests banned Inca infant, puberty, and marriage rituals, replacing Inca traditions with European customs. Multiple wives for nobles were forbidden, along with the use of feathers, ritual fabrics, burnt offerings to the gods, and even the playing of conch shells at ceremonies. All visible traces of Inca polytheism, worshipping more than one god, were erased as priests distributed crucifixes and rosary beads by the thousands. To this day, reverence for all things in nature remains an important part of the Andes culture. Although most are Catholic, the people continue to make small sacrifices to their ancient gods to ensure they have good harvests. The last true Inca. Despite the Spanish efforts to wipe out the Sapa Inka family line, the sons of Manco Inca, Sayri Tupac, Tupac Amaru and Titu Cusi, survived. Sayri Tupac, 1535 to 1561, established an Inca state in the city of Vilcabamba, a refuge in the rainforest. In 1552, Sayri Tupac received a full pardon for any crimes against the Spanish. The young emperor of a dead empire accepted the opportunity to leave Vilcabamba and return to Cusco. Sayri Tupac remained in Cusco for 9 years, where he converted to Christianity and remarried his wife in the Catholic Church. In 1561, Sayri Tupac was poisoned, and the new Inca leader declared Vilcabamba to once again be a rebel state. Titu Cusi, 1530-1570, seized the throne from Sayri Tupac's heir, Tupac Amaru, 1544-1572. Titu Cusi became a rebel, attacking Christian travelers and raiding Spanish settlements. The self-proclaimed emperor had good reason to despise the Spanish. They had killed his father and brothers and raped his aunts, sister and cousin. He had been imprisoned and treated harshly by his Spanish captors. As he aged, though, Titu Cusi became less interested in resistance and negotiated peace. He promised loyalty to the Spanish king and became a Catholic. He died in 1570, and Tupac Amaru, the last true Inca, took the throne. Again, the Incas rose up against the Spanish. On June 1st, 1572, the first battle for control of the Vilcabamba Valley occurred. Within 3 weeks, the Spanish had advanced into the heart of Vilcabamba, a city in ruins. The buildings had burned, the people had vanished, and the food storage bins had suffered destruction. Tupac Amaru and his followers had disappeared into the jungle. 3 months later, the Spanish captured Tupac Amaru and marched him into Cusco. At the same time as they attempted to convert him to Christianity, the Spanish tried, convicted, and sentenced him to hang. The Spanish tortured several of Tupac Amaru's followers to death, then hanged their corpses as a display of their power and ruthlessness. The Inca's execution became a spectacle, with thousands of Incas around the gallows wailing over the coming death of their leader. The Spanish viceroy, seeing the crush of the crowd, declared that Tupac Amaru should be immediately beheaded. James Q. Jacobs writes in his article, "Tupac Amaru, the life, times, and execution of the last Inca," that the Inca's last words were, "Kolanan Pachacamac Rikui Aukakuna Yahuarni Hichkaskankuta." Mother Earth, witness how my enemies shed my blood. By one account, Tupac Amaru placed his head on the block. The executioner took Tupac's hair in one hand and severed his head in a single blow. He raised his Tupac's head for the crowd to view. Simultaneously, the city's numerous churches and monasteries rang their bells. All the native peoples present were filled with great sorrow and tears. From 1742 to 1761, Juan Santos Atahualpa attempted a rebellion against Spanish rule. His Neo-Inca movement arose because the Spanish treated Peruvians like slaves. The Peruvians farmed land that they did not own and had to pay large fees to do it. There was no way to escape the grinding cycle of poverty that enslaved the Peruvians and made the Spanish wealthy. Following Juan Santos Atahualpa, the Peruvian rebels invoked the time-honored Inca method of punishment by tossing a Spanish corregidor, royal administrator, and his brother-in-law from a cliff. The English, seeking way to reduce Spanish influence worldwide, provided financial support for the Neo-Inca movement. However, the Spanish's deep-rooted presence in Peru prevented their removal. The Neo-Inca effort failed, and the Spanish maintained firm control. In 1780, José Gabriel Condor Canqui, kanji 1738 to 1781, who claimed to be a direct descendant of the last true Inca Tupac Amaru, emerged as the leader of a rebel army numbering nearly 80,000. Their goals were to achieve social reforms in mining and forced labor, and to remove corrupt corregidors. Condor Canqui was renamed Tupac Amaru II in 1771, leading his followers in repeated attacks against Spanish leaders, mines, and plantation owners. Within a year, the Spanish military arrested Tupac Amaru II, held a fake trial, and tortured the rebel leader. The Spanish revenge against Tupac Amaru II was remarkable for its brutality. The Inca leader was forced to watch the execution of his wife, son, and comrades. On May 18, 1781, Tupac Amaru spoke his final words to the Spanish viceroy. "There are no accomplices here but you and I. You, the oppressor, and I, the liberator. Both of us deserve death," as quoted on the website Tupac Amaru II. The Spanish cut out his tongue and then tied him to 4 horses to tear his body apart. The attempt proved unsuccessful, so the Spanish cut off his head and dismembered the body. They displayed the Inca's severed arms and legs in the main strongholds of the Inca rebellion. However, their thirst for revenge was not yet satisfied. The Spanish hunted down and murdered every relative of Tupac Amaru II, all the way to his 4th cousins. There would be no more rebellions against the Spanish or uprisings to restore Inca rule. The bigger the Inca Empire grew, the more difficult it became to organize, control, and manage its subjects. The Incas attempted to impose their social values and requirements on new Inca subjects as they conquered new cultures. Little rebellions became a common feature of the giant empire. And between the late 1400s and early 1500s, the Inca army was constantly on the move. The conquered people residing on the outer fringes of the empire attempted to overthrow their new rulers. But their efforts were unsuccessful. The rigid systems that had brought the Inca Empire to greatness became an unwelcome way of life for some people. The government structure followed a simple plan based on decimal units. 10 households comprised an élu or clan group. Bachelors, unmarried women, widows, and widowers usually lived in a core family unit. When a man got married, he became a taxpayer and a public figure, while his wife was listed as a subject and a member of the Alu. One leader, a Conga Kamayok, ensured everyone within the Alu worked and paid taxes. He also kept accurate records of births, deaths, marriages, the ages of the Alu members, crop yields, and wool and meat from herds of llamas. Government inspectors toured the regions to ensure each Conga Kamayok leader did their job. The inspectors were called Tokoiri Kok, which means see all. They spied on everything from how to clean a house to the work produced by an Alu. There were official government spies at every level to ensure no one cheated the Sapa Inka. This profession was considered honorable, since the spies prevented corruption at every level of the government. Moving up on the governmental ladder, higher officials oversaw increasingly larger units of households. 20,000 households comprised a province. Each province had a governor who was responsible for its affairs. There were more than 80 provinces in the Inca Empire, so the government added 80 or more administrators to the bureaucracy. Each governor was under the orders of the APU of the quarter in which his province lay, says anthropologist Michael Malpass, in Daily Life in the Inca Empire. The empire was divided into quarters, suyus, with several provinces. Apus, top-ranking officials who were noble relatives of the Sapa Inka, administered the government of each quarter. At the top of the government, Hahua Inkas, appointed nobles, reported to Capac Inkas, born nobles, who in turn reported to the Sapa Inka. The Inca government system was thus like a pyramid, with peasants forming the foundation and the Sapa Inka at the very top. The Sapa Inka. The Inca Empire had 3 basic pyramids of power: civil, military, and religious. and the Sapa Inka was the head of all three. He guided the civil government, commanded the military, and was thought to be the direct descendant of the primary Inca god, Inti. Kings and emperors have always been known by several different titles, which is true for Inca rulers. First was the title Sapa Inka, which means unique leader. He was also the commander-in-chief of the army. The people believed he was the son of the sun, which meant he was a god himself. Finally, the Sapa Inka was also called lover of the poor, because it was ultimately his responsibility to keep the peasants safe, make sure they had food and clothing, and provide for them in sickness and old age. The Sapa Inka's main wife, or koya, was usually a full-blood sister, but not always. He also had the right to take as many secondary wives as he desired. Some historians claim that some Inca leaders had as many as 100 secondary wives. The secondary wives were often the daughters of high-ranking leaders of conquered peoples, or daughters of provincial governors or apus. Secondary wives were considered noble, but they were not royal. Their children would never lead the empire, but would become part of the Inca administration. The people proved their loyalty to the Sapa Inka in many ways, but the most dramatic was the sacrifice shown by the capacochas. In an annual event, the capacochas, usually children, were killed as a special sacrifice. In his book, Inca Myths, anthropologist and historian Gary Urton says, "These individuals were sent from the provinces to Cusco, where they were sanctified, made holy, by the priests of the Incas. The capacochas were then returned to their home territories, marching in sacred procession along straight lines, where they were sacrificed. The sacrifices sealed bonds of alliance between the home community and the Inca in Cusco. The Sapa Inka lived an extraordinarily luxurious life, particularly compared to the sunrise to sunset workdays of his people. He wore a tunic of the softest vicuña wool and decorated his arms with gold bracelets. Around his neck hung a chestplate of gold and jewels representing the sun. Gold earplugs 3 inches in diameter filled his extended earlobes. He even wore gold sandals on his feet. Walking in gold sandals may have been a problem, but the Sapa Inka rarely walked. He rode in a litter covered with gold and gems. The Sapa Inka's days included daily government audiences where people came to honor him. According to Spanish chronicler Pedro de Chiesa de Leon in Chronicle of Peru, from many of the lords of the country there came emissaries every day bringing gifts. The court was filled with nobles and his palaces with vessels of gold and silver and other great treasures. In the morning he took his meal, and from noon until late in the day he gave audience, accompanied by his guard, to whoever wished to talk with him. Like his subjects, the Sapa Inka ate only 2 meals a day. While he ate a wider variety of better quality foods, his main meals consisted of similar foods to those the peasants ate. These included potatoes, corn, quinoa, dried llama meat, dried fish, stewed guinea pig, and herbs. The Sapa Inka drank chicha, a corn-based beer just like his subjects. The Inca people rarely drank water, as no drinkable water was available, or llama milk, and did not have wine. Beyond the basic laws that Inca subjects lived by, the Sapa Inka could add new laws that suited their needs. For example, Cronista Garcilaso de la Vega says in the Incas that Sapa Inka Pachacuti prohibited anyone except princes and their sons from wearing gold, silver, precious stones, plumes of feathers of different colors, or the wool of the vicuña. The koya. The koya was the Sapa Inka's principal wife, often his full-blooded sister and the mother of the heir to the throne. The koya maintained her household and court, complete with ladies-in-waiting. The grounds around her palace often featured a small botanical garden and a modest zoo. While the Sapa Inka was the son of the sun, the koya was responsible for the cult of the moon. Commoners often called the koya Mamanchik, meaning our mother in Quechua Inca. The Koya dressed in long robes of soft vicuña wool, gathered at the shoulder with a decorative pin. As she walked on a fine wool carpet, servants held a canopy of feathers over her. Her meals, like those of the Sapa Inka, were served on gold and silver plates, although the food was the same as that of all Inca subjects. She had no direct ability to rule and could never become Sapa Inka, but she did have general authority over the women of the empire. She also influenced daily politics through her family ties in other royal lines. Some Koya played greater roles in the Inca Empire than others. The most influential may have been Mama Kuka, the wife of Maita Capac. Botany, landscaping, and other natural sciences fascinated her. After studying agronomy, a branch of agriculture dealing with soil management and crop production, she experimented and introduced new strains of vegetables for farmers. She also arranged plantings around the palaces. Mama Kuka also recognized the value of fishing for food and promoted successful fishing techniques among the empire's citizens. To help the military, she found ways of taking venom from snakes and using the poison to coat arrowheads and spearheads. Secondary wives could not become the principal wives of the Sapa Inka if the Koya died. This rule kept the Koya and her children safe from jealous and ambitious secondary wives, for the most part. Clearly, the policy did not work in the case of Sapa Inka Capac Yupanqui's Koya, Kusi Hilpai. A secondary wife, Kusi Chimbo, arranged for both the Sapa Inka and the Crown Prince to be murdered, so that Inca Roca, her son, could be named the new ruler. Chimbo then married Inca Roca and became the Koya through her second marriage. A noble-born Inca was a person who could trace his family tree back to Manco Capac, the first Sapa Inka, however remotely. These nobles were called Capac Inka, which means capable leader. They were also relatives of the Sapa Inka, although they could be distant cousins. Direct descendants of Manco Capac could be part of the state council, similar to the president's cabinet in the United States. These men advised the Sapa Inka on the empire's state and ensured the execution of their orders. 4 Capac Incas, known as Apus, managed the 4 quarters of the empire. By demonstrating devotion to the Sapa Inka, or through outstanding military service, Hahua Incas rose to the noble class and gained status. Like the Capac Incas, they were responsible for the administrative tasks of running the empire. They planned, organized, supervised, and managed large groups of citizens. Nobles received gifts and privileges from the Sapa Inka, including tunics of cumbia, vicuña wool, which they might wear for special occasions in Cusco. They also gained land, servants, herds of llamas, and wives, selected for them by the Sapa Inka. Polygamy, having more than one wife, was only a right of the noble classes. Capac and Hahua Incas rode in litter and used gold or silver bowls or plates. Most importantly, they did not have to pay regular taxes to the Sapa Inka and the religious sector. Curacas and other civil leaders. Caracas came from the lower ranks of the nobles and former leaders of conquered cultures. They were part of the Inca government system, overseeing large groups of households, usually 100, 500, 1,000, or 5,000 in number. Caracas's primary functions were to ensure workers worked and taxpayers paid taxes. Caracas had some of the same rights as nobles. They received gifts of land, servants, and cloth from the Sapa Inka, could ride in litter, and could have more than one wife. Higher-level Caracas also did not have to pay taxes. Caracas had to prove their loyalty to the Sapa Inka and perform their jobs without favoritism or corruption. The Sapa Inka expected them to spend part of their time in Cusco, while their sons attended school in the capital. Daughters might be married as secondary wives to the Sapa Inka, Capac Incas, or Hahua Incas. Beneath the level of accuracy was the canyon, or foreman, who served as the local leader of an elu. The canyon kept track of the work and production of people within his group. Curaçao and Camayoc positions were inherited, and fathers trained their sons in their future careers. Artisans, engineers, architects, and other skilled workers were somewhere between the nobles and the peasants. The Khipu, for example, conquered by the Inca around 1465, were excellent jewelers, goldsmiths, and silversmiths. The Inca honored these talents. They didn't have to work in the fields, but they had to give 2/3 of their earnings to the Sapa Inka and the religious community. Stonemasons, architects, and engineers worked for the Sapa Inka. Although they did not produce items that could be sold or traded, their services were highly valued. Because these services benefited the community and the Sapa. Integrating Kaya. Architects and engineers were not required to perform other labor or pay taxes. Commoners. Peasants lived under a strict code of rules. They could be farmers, herders, miners, or fishermen, but they did not get to choose. A boy had to follow the same profession as his father. Government officials watched over their work and provided for them if crops failed, they got sick or injured, or they reached the Inca retirement age of 50. However, retirement did not mean sleeping late and relaxing. Older people still worked. They did not build roads, plow fields, serve in the army, or dig in the mines. Everyone, including children and older people, worked diligently. However, those unable to work were fed, housed, and clothed at the Sapa Inka's expense. Today, we would call this type of system a socialist government. The lives of peasants were as structured as everything else in the Inca Empire. The government planned for every stage of life. If conquered people had too much spare time, the Inca rulers believed they might become restless. Absolute control was also necessary, because there were never more than 1,000 Incas ruling a region that covered 5 modern countries and was populated by dozens of different ethnic groups and millions of people. Once a child reached 5 years old, they had jobs. Girls learned to cut kernels from corn cobs, dehydrate potatoes, and cook. Boys carried water, kept away pests from crops, and helped with planting and harvesting. Older girls watched over their younger brothers and sisters, fetched water and food for livestock, cooked meals and weeded fields. Girls married when they were 16 to 20 years old. Wives maintained the house, helped with ploughing and planting, processed and stored food, and had children. At about age 25, young men married and immediately became taxpayers. District governors arranged marriages for people who did not choose spouses alone. Living as a single man or woman was not acceptable. Formal education was not available to children of peasants or craftspeople. The children learned from their parents. The military and the religious community were the areas where there was some possibility of getting ahead. A young man who showed exceptional skills as a warrior might rise to lead a troop of 10, a battalion of 50 or 100, or become commander of a regiment. In the religious community, attractive girls around 10 years old might be selected to become one of the chosen women or called. These girls were sent to the Aclahuasi to study expert weaving skills, make chicha for the Sapa Inka and the priests, and participate in religious rites. Some girls would become brides of nobles or secondary wives of the Sapa Inka. Others remained in religious life, eventually becoming teachers in the Aclahuasi. Some became kapakochas, human sacrifices. Mitmakonas. On occasion, a newly conquered group of people did not fit in well with the structure of the Inca Empire. The solution to this problem was to break up rebellious groups and send the people to work elsewhere, where they were loyal to the empire. Their departure left a messy gap in the workforce. The Inca government filled this gap with Mitmakonas. Mitmakonas were people loyal to the Sapa Inka who followed the pattern of hard work and paying taxes. They moved to the rebellious region and brought order by setting a positive example. They moved entire families, individual Aylus, or groups of Aylus, into the region. Becoming a Mitmakona was an honor for both the individual and the community. Mitmakonas received special privileges, including wearing their home colors, the dress and headgear of their particular regions, even while living in their new location. In their new locations, the Mitmakonas could also follow the ethnic and religious customs of their home regions. Tribal or ethnic communities from which Mitmakonas originated also reaped benefits, potentially receiving additional land for crops or other privileges. In her book Kingdom of the Sun, historian Ruth Karen writes, "A loyal highland people that had furnished an appreciable number of Mitmakona might be awarded fields in the lowlands, which its purists, taxpayers, could work to obtain products. Fruit and vegetables that could not be grown in their own colder climate. Naturally, the community received 1/3 of the taxes from these new products, while the Sapa Inka and religious communities received 2/3. Workers paid 2/3 of everything they produced in taxes. For example, farmers paid their taxes by working the fields and pastures owned by the government. 1/3 of the crop was the ailus to keep. Another third, placed in storehouses for distribution in case of drought or famine, was the property of the Sapa Inka. Priests and religious groups owned the last third, which they used to feed the people at religious events and make sacrifices to the gods. The Incas did not use currency of any kind. They traded objects of equal value through a trading system known as the barter system. Among the most highly valued products was cloth. Every woman spun cotton or wool into thread and wove cloth in her spare time. Cloth could also be used to pay taxes. Government warehouses stored it as clothing for the poor or the military. In addition to a share of crops or goods produced, all adult males had to provide a period of labor called mita to the government. A farmer, for example, might provide 2 weeks of service in the army, building roads or digging in the mines. While he was away, his fellow Ailu members toiled in his fields, ensuring his family remained fed. Often, if the mita duty was mining or construction, the worker could bring his wife and family along. Through the mita, the Incas built paved roads, canals, bridges, and agricultural terraces. Mita labor supported irrigation programs, dug gold and silver from mines, and built government storehouses, keeping accurate accounts. Despite the absence of a written language, the Inca people demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in developing an accounting or recording system that even modern mathematicians find challenging to decipher. The Khipu, a system of knots, named after the word for knots, was of paramount importance to the Inca government. It was a reliable tool for accurate record-keeping at every level. A quipu with thousands of strings might be a few inches long, or as much as 10 feet, circa 3 meters. Here is an example of how a quipu might be constructed. The quipu maker counts herds and crop yields in a region to decide how much tax the people must pay. There are 100 taxable households, and their products include 25 herds of llamas and various farm crops. The first set of knots might use brown yarn to represent one big knot for the 100 households. This step is followed by sets of smaller knots, loops, and twists that illustrate how these 100 households are broken down by the number of children each household has. They might show 42 households with 3 children, 36 with 2 children, 14 with 1 child, and 8 with no children. The next set of knots, which are possibly white, might represent 25 herds of llamas. Connected knots could show the number of animals per herd. Crops might be listed in size order: corn, potatoes, quinoa, and so on, with each crop having a specific string color. The quipu maker, Khipu Kamayoks, recorded the number of taxpayers in a region, an accurate population count, the amount and variety of crops grown or products produced, and the tax paid for every bit of material grown, dug, or created. Several quipu makers might be charged with recording the same territory as a backup system. Khipu makers at higher levels created quipus incorporating data from several smaller elas. The problem with understanding the system today is that every quipu maker used different colors, knot formations, and string arrangements to make their quipu. Only the person who made the quipu could translate its meaning. Chronistas of the Inca Empire, the Spanish soldiers, clerks, and priests who wrote detailed accounts of the history, customs, and daily lives of the Inca citizens, wrote about quipus and quipu makers. Every quarter, province, and district had several quipu makers, who constantly recorded every detail of Inca life. So archaeologists might expect to find many quipus in burial sites. However, only a few quipus have survived to the present day. Spanish priests held the belief that quipus were pagan objects that required destruction. They burned thousands of records that might have provided a key to understanding the quipu. Only about 400 quipus are left, and archaeologists have found them in burial mounds. Based on the evidence of several burials, the archaeologists believe that bodies buried with quipus were possibly important people in the district. In 1910, L.R. Leland Locke of New York's American Museum of Natural History unraveled the first hint of the quipus. Mathematicians continue to study quipus, making slow progress in understanding the accounting system of a culture without written language. The law. With social and civil structures so clearly defined, there were few laws in the Inca Empire. The basic laws were: do not be lazy, do not lie, do not steal, do not commit murder, do not commit adultery, cheat on your spouse. These laws were strictly enforced. People of higher social status who committed crimes were punished much more severely than commoners were. The Incas believed a better lifestyle demanded better behavior. Breaking the law was not acceptable, and punishments could be dreadful. Hanging over a deep ravine by hair was perhaps the most gruesome punishment. When the hair roots gave out, the victim fell to certain death on the rocks below. As Michael Malpass, in his book Daily Life in the Inca Empire, says, adultery among commoners was punishable by torture, but if the woman was a noble, both parties were executed. The government treated crimes with special severity. Stealing from the fields of the state was punishable by death. If a karacha put a person to death without permission of his superior, a heavy stone was dropped on his back from a height of 3 feet. If he committed the same act again, he faced death. The punishment for treason was imprisoning the individual in an underground Cusco prison teeming with snakes and dangerous animals. District officials acted as judges, holding trials for the crimes committed in their regions. Crime at any social level was rare, since the guilty person would surely be caught, and punishment was swift and harsh. Trials usually occurred within 5 days of the criminal being caught, and sentences were carried out immediately. Death sentences were common for murder, adultery with a noble, and theft of property from the Sapa Inka or the religious warehouses. They beat commoners to death with stone clubs or threw them over a cliff's edge. The punishment of having a heavy stone dropped from a 3-foot height might bring death or serious injury. The punishment for being jailed in the place of the pit was a death sentence reserved for nobles and government leaders. The pit was a maze filled with poisonous snakes, spiders, scorpions, and hungry pumas. The walls and floor had jagged rocks and metal shards embedded so the prisoners could find no rest. Naturally, they did not provide water or food. A starving person who stole food received a lesser punishment than a person who stole food he did not need to keep himself and his family alive. Even harsher punishments befell the local government administrator in that person's district. The Incas expected no one to go hungry. Therefore, if the local administrator found someone starving, they had failed in their duty. His punishment could be loss of rank, public insult, or in serious situations, banishment to the coca fields on the eastern slope of the Andes. Commoners' code of life was amasua, amalula, and amachakal. Do not steal, lie, or be lazy. A lazy woman who maintained a dirty home had to consume her own household dirt. Her husband, also held responsible for a poorly kept home, had to eat dirt or drink the wastewater after his dirty family bathed. Lazy field workers could face torture or whipping for their failure to work, and repeated laziness could result in death by clubbing. Even marriage had its set of regulations overseen by civil government officials. The Incas did not believe in divorce or separation. The marriage lasted a lifetime. If a husband tried to get rid of his wife, he was forced to take her back. A second offense meant public punishment for the husband. Putting out his wife 3 times meant death for the husband by clubbing or being thrown off a cliff. Marriage laws apply to all citizens. Nobles were allowed to take a secondary wife, but had to keep their primary wife for life. Such punishments were rare because crime was rare. Since the standard punishment for most crimes was a painful death, few people committed any crimes, and even fewer committed more than one crime. From birth, Inca. Citizens learned the expectation of continuous work. They expected nothing else, so they rarely rebelled against the government's expectations. Trade and transport. The Incas did not trade with their neighbors. If a culture had something the Incas wanted or needed, they conquered the people. The Inca Empire grew so much that it had everything it needed. But trade within the empire was brisk. All trading was on the barter system, trading goods or services for items both parties considered of equal value. The Incas had no form of currency. Inca communities produced various foods for the empire: corn and potatoes, quinoa, dried llama or fish, herbs, peppers, and hundreds of other foods. Different regions may have eaten different foods, but hunger was rare. Mountain people ate more guinea pigs and llama meat. Coastal groups ate fish and seafood. Trading within the empire took place at regional markets. People traded cloth for llama skins, dried llama meat for dried fish, pottery for medicinal herbs, and so on. For example, if a woman with a sore eye needed medical care, she might pay 4 potatoes or a length of cloth to the local herbalist for treatment. One factor that limited trade was a lack of transportation. The Incas did not have the wheel, so carts were not an option. They did not have horses or oxen to bear heavy loads. Humans or llamas carried goods on their backs. The Incas had boats and rafts, which were usually used for short-distance travel or fishing. The Incas constructed rafts from reeds and occasionally logs on mountain rivers and lakes, but their strength was insufficient to transport heavy loads. Along the Pacific Ocean, larger ocean-going rafts built from logs and seal skins carried fishermen out to sea. They too did not carry heavy loads. They also were not strong enough to travel over enormous distances. Laziness was a crime in the Inca Empire, so work dominated daily life. Inca subjects lived by 2 calendars: diurnal daytime and nocturnal nighttime. The diurnal calendar was 365 days long and based on the sun's movements. It set the work pattern for the empire, including specific agricultural activities, building projects, and warfare. The nocturnal calendar was 328 nights long and based on the moon's movements. It determined the schedule of rituals and religious celebrations. The Incas were not bothered by the fact that the 2 calendars did not have an equal number of days. What happened on nights that were not on the calendar is not known. Because the Inca Empire lay close to the equator, there were not 4 true seasons. The climate had only wet and dry seasons. However, the altitude in many Inca regions was so high that snow, ice, and blizzards were common. December, Capac Remi, started each new year. It was the time for planting coca, some potatoes, and quinoa. At night, the people celebrated puberty rituals for boys reaching manhood. This month, taxes, sacrifices, and gifts to the Sapa Inka arrived in Cusco. In January, Kamai Quia saw farmers preparing their fields. Men and women worked side by side with wooden plows and hoes. The nocturnal calendar continued puberty ceremonies, often spanning 3 weeks or more. February, Hatun Puchui, and March, Pacha Puchui, were considered late summer. Potatoes, jicama, and other root vegetables were harvested. At night, they performed rituals in crops. April, Iriwa, found peasants chasing away deer, foxes, and birds from the cornfields to stop them from eating crops. Farmers pounded loud drums and hurled pebbles with their slingshots at hungry birds to protect crops as they ripened for harvest. At night, commoners participated in ceremonies to honor their leader, the Sapa Inka. May, Aimore Quilla, brought the corn harvest and celebrations similar to those celebrated today on Thanksgiving. June, Inti Raymi, celebrated the Inca sun god each evening. We spent the days harvesting more potatoes, tubers, root vegetables, and other crops. July, Chahuahaquiz, was the heart of the Inca winter. However, work continued despite the cold and sometimes even snow. Meats were smoked or dried, and potatoes were freeze-dried for storage. Men served their mitres by building and repairing irrigation ditches and canals. Religious rituals were offered in honor of irrigation, since most of the crops eaten by the people of the Inca Empire depended on irrigation systems. It was only natural for the people to ask their gods to bless the systems that carried life-giving water to their fields. August, Yapakiz, and September, Koya Remi, were spring-like planting seasons. Farmers used foot hoes to turn the winter-hardened soil, planting corn seeds and early potato crops. Farmers planted grains and other crops once the corn and potato crops were secure. Religious rites during this season ensured the help of the Inca gods in providing beneficial crops and controlling the negative elements of nature. They also offered rites during Koya Remi to cleanse and purify the capital city of Cusco. People dedicated October, Kantarai, and November, Ayamarca, to promoting good crops and praying for rain, but not too much. Historically, Ayamarca saw little rain, and farmers began using irrigation ditches to water the corn crops. This season honored the dead at a festival where mummies of earlier Sapa Incas were brought from their homes on golden litters and offered gifts of gold, cloth, and food. From birth to old age. The birth was nothing special and no cause for celebration. Mothers gave birth on their own. While a mother was in labor, the father did not eat, which was believed to ensure a healthy birth. Immediately after birth, the mother washed her newborn in cold water from a nearby stream. Native North American cultures called the newborn child Wawa, or baby, and did not name them for at least a year. A few days after birth, native North American cultures placed the infant in a quirao, or cradle, akin to a papoose board. Babies were kept tightly strapped in the choir throughout the day. When old enough to crawl or stand, the baby would be placed in a hole in the ground that was deep enough to keep the child from harm during the day. This arrangement enabled the mother to focus on her work, leaving the baby to manage independently. Babies were breastfed, but never held or cuddled. Cronista Garcilaso de la Vega described Inca mothers in his book, The Incas, Royal Commentaries. They never held them while feeding them, fearing it would make them cry and want to be held by their mothers instead of being in their cradles. The mother leaned over her child 3 times a day to nurse it. They did not give the child milk at any other time, even if it cried, for they said that if they did, it would want to be sucked all day and become dirty with vomit, and that when it was a man, it would grow up a great eater and a glutton. Mothers did not stop breastfeeding their children until they were a year old or older. At this point, the family and friends celebrated a retuchikoi ceremony, when a close uncle or grandfather would first cut a lock from the child's hair. Other guests cut locks of hair and gave the child or family gifts. At this time, the child received a temporary name that usually reflected events surrounding the birth. A boy might be named Hawk, Snake, or Flood. A girl might be called Silver, Gold, or Sunshine. Temporary names were used until a child reached puberty. By the age of 6, people expected children to work. Boys and girls chased animals from crop fields, collected fruit and nuts, and helped with household chores. Girls learned to spin thread, weave cloth, and prepare food. Boys learned how to make sandals of grass, wool or leather, plough, dig in the mines, and cut rock, whatever their future jobs would be. Although children did not do as much work as adults, they learned from birth that work was never acceptable. Inca boys became men at roughly 14 years of age. The entire community celebrated the event at a feast held during Kapak Remi, December. The feast, called Huarachikoi, lasted several weeks and featured massive meals, dances, and tests of strength and endurance. Boys received their first loincloth, a single piece of cloth worn wrapped around the hips, woven by their mothers, along with other clothing worn by adults. They also received their first weapons of war: a slingshot, a shield, and a mace. These represented a man's ability to serve in the military. The Huarachikoi included a trip by the boys to Huanacauri, a sacred mountain near Cusco. Each boy brought a llama to be sacrificed to the mountain's spirit. As they returned down the mountain, their relatives whipped their legs with sticks. They expected the boys to bear the pain without complaining as a sign of maturity. Once past the puberty ceremony, teenage boys took on greater responsibility, although they still did not carry a full adult workload until they married. Puberty rituals for girls were a minor event compared to those for boys. When a girl experienced her first menstrual period, the puberty ceremony was held. The family and friends then celebrated for 2 days at Kikochikoi. A girl fasted, ate nothing, for 3 days. On the 4th day, she appeared before her friends and family, freshly bathed and dressed in fine clothing. For boys and girls, puberty was when they received permanent or adult names. Every social class performed these rituals. However, only noble boys underwent the ceremony of ear piercing. As they matured, young men's earlobes would stretch increasingly until they could wear golden earplugs measuring up to 3 inches across. Inca men married at about age 25, and girls between ages 16 and 20. Men and women of marriageable age could choose their mates, have marriages arranged by their families, or have a government-negotiated marriage. The local curachao, or leader, had to approve any marriage, and regional governors performed the marriage ceremony. Members of the couple's ailu, or local clan, built a one-room house for them. Their parents provided household goods, including cooking pots, bowls, baskets, and blankets. The husband automatically became a public taxpayer when the governor recorded the marriage. The Sapa Inka provided each Purik with enough land to support the husband and wife, although the amount of land depended on the region and its ability to produce crops. This parcel of land, called the topo, might be 1 or 2 acres. The couple didn't own the land because the government owned all of it in the Inca Empire. The government only granted them the right to farm on the land. As a couple had children, they received additional land. The birth of each son might entitle the couple to another acre or 2. The birth of each daughter might entitle the couple to 1/2 acre. Marriage for members of the nobility was very different from marriage among commoners. Men of the noble class practiced polygamy, taking 2 or more wives, but Inca law forbade polygamy among commoners. Inheritance and succession, passing on the family's rank, were based on a child's mother and father. The father had to be a member of the noble class, but only his primary wife's children were nobles. Children of secondary wives filled the growing need for regional rulers. A secondary wife could not take her place if a primary wife died. This practice reduced jealousy and probably saved the lives of many primary wives and their sons. The government supported people who were too old, too sick, or too disabled to work. Few people lived to age 50, and those who did were relieved of the normal adult workload. They were given tasks suited to their age, such as stripping corn from the cob, drying or smoking fish or meat, or educating children about household chores. Widows were not required to marry again, and a farmer's widow kept the family topo until she died. The members of her ailu ploughed and planted it for her. If she could still work, she might assist in the planting, weeding, or harvesting. However, no one expected her to farm the land without assistance. Rural life. The Inca love for order and organization extended to the most remote areas of the empire. Rural folk worked various jobs, such as farming, herding, and mining. Depending on the altitude and irrigation system, farmers grew corn, various types of potatoes, beans, squash, fruit, and dozens of other food plants and herbs. Men and women worked the fields together. The man turned the soil with a foot plough called a tackle while his wife moved along the ploughed row, breaking up soil clumps with a lamp and a wooden hoe. Those who worked with livestock maintained herds of llamas that provided food, wool, leather, and pack animals. A llama could travel about 20 miles, 32 kilometers a day. But greater distances were impossible because llama handlers walked beside their animals. Most mines were high in the Andes Mountains, where work was difficult because the high altitude meant reduced oxygen levels and colder temperatures. Most miners did not work a full Inca workday from sunrise to sunset. Instead, they usually worked only 6 to 8 hours in the mines. Men were responsible for doing their daily jobs, hunting under the watchful eye of the local Kamayok leader, paying taxes and serving their mita. In addition to providing labor for repairing or building roads, irrigation canals, and bridges, men could also serve in the military. Men also made their families sandals. They made sandals from woven plant fibers, wool or leather, and pottery, weapons, and wooden tools. Even the Sapa Inka knew how to make sandals, a skill required of every adult male. Women worked the fields, cooked, raised the children, nursed the sick, and kept the house. They spun fiber into yarn and woven cloth to produce clothing for the family and to pay taxes. There was no time wasted in a woman's day. Any idle time, including walking to and from the fields, was spent spinning and weaving. Rural children received no formal schooling. Instead, they learned about their future jobs from their parents. Since there was no opportunity to move up in society, they needed no other education. Families lived in one-room houses with stone walls and roofs made of bundles of straw or grass called thatch. Since there was little theft and most people owned nothing of significant value, houses did not have doors or windows, just open entryways. Houses offered protection from the elements at night when families huddled together on piles of straw to sleep. Eating, cooking, general work, child care, and all other daily chores were done outside, regardless of the weather. City life. Government administrators and subjects traveled to the Inca cities on special occasions, such as paying taxes or participating in religious celebrations. Cusco was the capital of the Incas, but each region had at least one major city where government officials lived and religious ceremonies occurred. At a time when European cities had open sewers and garbage was dumped into the streets, Inca cities had clean running water and a complex sewer system. Some city engineers tapped into underground hot springs to provide nobles with hot and cold running water. Expert weavers, potters, masons, and metalworkers went to the cities to work. These jobs, like farming and herding, were passed from generation to generation. Children of artisans began studying for their trades at about 6 years old. Even in the cities, few children attended schools. Due to the absence of a written language and a rigid social structure that restricted upward mobility, children did not need to learn beyond what was taught at home. Formal education was limited to sons of nobles, sons of provincial rulers, and conquered leaders, and the chosen women, Aklas. Noble boys attended school in Cusco for about 4 years, where they learned history, military strategy, religion, and the use and development of the Khipu record-keeping system. Teachers, amautas, disciplined their students by beating or whipping them, which was acceptable to Inca parents. People in cities still had to work from sunrise to sunset, which did not significantly differ from life in rural areas. They used their homes to sleep and performed all other daily tasks outside. What the Incas ate. Urban or rural, Sapa Inka, nobleman, farmer or miner. Inca people all ate roughly the same food. The Sapa Inka ate their meals off gold or silver plates, while his people ate off wooden platters. But they all ate corn, potatoes, grains, and meat. The region where the Incas lived is responsible for between 50 and 60% of the plants people eat today. Corn, maize, and potatoes were the two most common and important. Maize was not a staple anywhere in Peru until after 500 BCE. It first appeared about 6000 BCE in Mexico, and spread in primitive form through Central America and northern South America. It arrived in Peru before 3000 BCE, but did not become an important crop until much later. Even among the Chavin people, maize was only a secondary crop. However, in Inca times, it was the staple. Potatoes and sweet potatoes were common root vegetables along with jicama, oca, yucca, cassava, oluco, mashua, and begonia. Beans included kidney beans, lima beans, string beans, and uncommon varieties such as pizza, pasture, and tarsi. Cereal grains common in Inca times included maize, quinoa, caniwa, and amaranth. Today, people still eat corn on the cob creamed, popped, and as hominy grits or cornbread. Quinoa and amaranth are popular at health food stores and in bread, crackers, breakfast cereal, and flour. NASA astronauts have incorporated amaranth into their diet due to its nutritional value. Along with beans, meat provided needed protein for the Inca people. Most meat people in the Inca Empire ate came from llamas or alpacas. Guinea pigs were party food and were more important as a source of fat than protein. Those who lived along the ocean or major rivers enjoyed tuna, catfish, sardines, kingfish, mussels, and clams. The Inca people used dietary supplements just as much as people do today. They ate kaolin clay for upset stomachs or indigestion. Kaolin is a main ingredient in many common medicines people take today for the same problems. Inca cooks added salt and pepper to their foods for flavor because it is a dietary necessity. They also ate mineral lime to add calcium for strong bones. Every household, whether rural or urban, produced beer from corn and local berries. The beer, called chicha, was made in large pottery urns. To cool them, the urns were partially buried or placed in icy cold mountain streams. The Inca people drank water from clean mountain springs outside the cities. Clothing. Clothes were so highly valued by the Incas that they were used as currency, and many people paid taxes or bought needed goods with cloth. Several expert weavers, usually men or Aklas, wove cloth for the Sapa Inka. The finest cloth was made from vicuña wool from a wild relative of the llama, and was kept for use only by the nobles. Gifts of vicuña wool from the Sapa Inka were prized. The Dallas also produced cloth for religious shrines, priests, and priestesses. Commoners wore llama wool or a blend of wool and cotton. People living near the coast where it was hotter wore lightweight cotton. Regardless of rank, most men and women wore the same style of clothes. Men wore tunics that reached to the knees and loincloths for undergarments. Women donned long dresses that hung down to their ankles, secured by a waist-tied belt. Both men and women wore sandals made of grass or leather year-round, even when it snowed. Religion. While work consumed the diurnal or daytime calendar, religion dominated the nocturnal or nighttime calendar. Every month, at least one major religious celebration and at least 3 lesser ones. So the Incas had 120 days of religious rituals throughout the year. Celebrating life events added joy to the heavy workloads of the Inca people, whether they lived in heavily populated urban centers or remote rural towns. The Incas believed that the god Viracocha, who was neither male nor female, created the earth, sky, stars, and all living things. They believed Viracocha made the sun and moon by plucking them from an island in Lake Titicaca, high in the Andes Mountains. People and animals were formed from clay in Tiahuanaco on the lakeshore. The Incas honored the sun, Inti, as an important god, portraying it as a face within a golden disc surrounded by rays. Officially, the Sapa Inka was the son of the sun, a divine being who descended directly from the sun god. When the Sapa Inka died, the people believed he returned to the sun. The major religious event of the year was the Inti Raymi, a multi-day festival honoring Inti, complete with food supplied by the Sapa Inka and local priests. 16th-century Catholic priest Cristobal de Molina described the celebration in the fables and rites of the Incas. All the people of Cusco came out, according to their tribes and lineage, as richly dressed as their means would allow, and having made references to the Creator, the Sun, and the Lord Inca, they sat down on their benches and passed the day in eating and drinking and enjoying themselves, and they performed the tauki called Alansitua Saqui, a dance in red shirts down to their feet. They gave thanks to thee. They thank the Creator for sparing them to see that day and pray they might pass another year. After Inti, the god with the most power was Ilapa, who represented rain, thunder, and lightning. Ilapa was also the god of war. Pictures of Ilapa showed a man's form in the sky, holding a war club in one hand and a slingshot in the other. These 2 weapons were the principal weapons of the Inca military. Inca subjects worshipped several other gods and goddesses, all related to nature. Mamaquilla, the moon, was the honored sister and wife of Inti, the sun god. Shrines to Mamaquilla featured silver objects because the people believed silver came from the tears of the moon. The people believed that a puma or a snake had swallowed Mamaquilla during a lunar eclipse. To undo this tragedy, the people pounded drums, blew horns and pipes, and made a tremendous noise. Their efforts were rewarded when the moon reappeared. Priests and priestesses honored Pachamama, Mother Earth, and Mamacocha, Mother Water, by offering sacrifices to them to ensure prosperous harvests. The Incas honored their gods at a principal shrine in Cusco called the Coricancha. The interior of this dark stone building showcased gold and silver decorations. The Inca Empire set aside buildings to worship the 6 main gods, including Inti, Ilapa, and Mamaquilla. However, many holy places existed throughout the Inca Empire. The Incas built and maintained spirit dwellings and holy places called huacas, such as caves, springs, oddly shaped rocks, or specially built shrines. The Incas also honored battlegrounds and cemeteries as huacas. The idea of a spiritual place included spiritual objects such as amulets, an ornament or small piece of jewelry to protect against evil, danger, or disease, statues, relics, and animals and plants designated as holy. Thus, huaca meant all religious places and objects connected with gods and worship. Damaging or destroying a huaca was a crime. The Incas revered the sun, moon, and natural phenomena like thunder and lightning. They believed in an afterlife. They believed that 2 distinct souls possessed the body. When the person died, each soul followed a separate path. One path led to the person's origin. The nature of that origin depended on how virtuous and productive a life the person had led. Once mummified, the other soul would remain in the body forever. Bodies were treated with herbs and wrapped in a mummy bundle of cloth. They then buried the mummy. The mummy bundle contained many necessary personal items for the soul that stayed with the body. A goldsmith might be buried with his tools, a woman with her loom and yarn for weaving, and a potter with jars from his workshop. The Sapa Inkas were also mummified, but they were not buried. The Sapa Inka was considered a god and could not really die. The palace in which a Sapa Inka lived his life became his shrine for the afterlife. There, the mummy lived in splendor amid his former wives, servants, and household guards, who continued to serve his mummified body. They carried mummified Sapa Inkas on golden litter from their palaces to the plaza in Cusco during the Festival of the Dead in November. Feasts, music, and dancing honored them, and they received gifts of cloth, gold, and food. As diviners saw, daily life among the Incas depended heavily on each person's fate. These people foretold the future. They could predict illness, bad luck, and criminal investigations, and tell people what sacrifices should be made to avoid these unhappy events. Reading Coca leaves occasionally foretold future events. Sacrifices to the gods were the only way to overcome bad luck. These sacrifices included food, primarily potatoes, llamas, or guinea pigs, cloth, or other handicrafts. Religion was as carefully organized as every other part of Inca life. There was a head priest, the Umasilica, who would be roughly equivalent to a pope or archbishop in Christianity. Beneath the head priest was Williams, whose jobs were like those of regional administrators. The Hatsilicas supervised the religious communities of the Inca Empire. At the lowest level of priests were the Anaconda, or Llana Villas, who served as local priests, and would be compared with parish priests, synagogue rabbis, or church ministers today. Priests had several duties, including teaching the local people about the gods and performing rites in the gods' honor. Priests also listened to the confessions of commoners and provided them with a way to be forgiven for their sins. A rock strike on the back of the head could be a physical punishment. The most severe was a form of banishment that required a man or woman to live in the wilderness, find food in the woods, and keep away from other people. The loneliness of banishment was painful for people who depended on community life for survival. Women served the Inca religion as chosen women. Regional administrators selected these women, Aklas, for service by age 10. Based on their physical beauty, the girls could not refuse the honor. Aklas studied in the Aklahuasi, which housed them. Many became teachers for other Aklas. They were called mamakunas, or guardian mothers. The Akalas received training as young girls to pursue one of three roles: priestess, wife, or sacrifice. A girl might become a priestess of the sun or the moon, whose primary job was weaving fine cloth for the Sapa Inka, preparing food and cloth as offerings to Inca gods and goddesses, and participating in rituals. The most beautiful girls often became secondary wives for the Sapa Inka or other nobles, since the nobility could have more than one wife. The final group provided human sacrifices, although such offerings were not common. At the height of the Inca Empire, there may have been as many as 1,500 Acolas, whom the Spanish called the Virgins of the Sun. When a woman destined to become a priestess reached adulthood, she spoke vows that committed her to the religious life. These priestesses rarely saw men, not even a high priest or the Sapa Inka. A priestess would face execution if she had a lover. The people paid taxes to support the priests and Aklas, supplying the religious community with wool for spinning and weaving, food, leather, cloth, gold and silver for temples and shrines, and religious objects. The temples and shrines utilized the items as sacrificial offerings to sustain the religious community. Stored food provided feasts at public festivals. Among the many offerings made to the gods were daily animal and occasional human sacrifices. Unlike the Aztecs, the Incas did not believe that regular human sacrifice had any advantage over sacrificing animals or cloth. They did believe that specific gods should receive very specific sacrifices. Viracocha, the founder of the world, received the sacrifice of brown llamas, while white llamas were dedicated to Inti, and speckled or spotted animals became gifts to Ilapa. Human sacrifice was made only when sacrificing animals did not seem sufficient, such as during major earthquakes, droughts, famines, or eclipses. The most common victims were girls and boys about 10 years of age, although some victims were infants. Historians believe child sacrifices may have taken place twice a year. The Incas were practical people, and most Inca art was, IMHO, purposeful. The Incas admired production, not original designs. They saw no use for art that showed landscapes, portraits, or interpretations of the human experience. Critics claim that Inca art shows little imagination because Inca artists use the same themes over and over. However, few weavers today could produce cloth as intricate and tightly woven as the Incas did. Even with modern tools, today's potters would have difficulty reproducing the fine pottery and glazes of the Moche. And few rulers today enjoy gardens decorated with perfect gold replicas of corn, flies, and guinea pigs. Cronista Garcilaso de la Vega described, in the Inca's royal commentaries, the Sapa Inka's garden. There were fields of corn with silver stalks and golden ears on which the leaves, grains, and even the corn silk were shown. In addition, there were all kinds of gold and silver animals in these gardens, such as rabbits, mice, lizards, snakes, butterflies, foxes, and wildcats. There were birds set in the trees, and others bent over the flowers, breathing in their nectar. Although every woman and many men could make cloth, expert textile weavers were especially valued for their talents. In their hands, yellow, red, brown, and gold yarns came together in detailed geometric patterns. Only nobles wore patterned cloth, and lesser nobles' clothing never outshone the Sapa Inka's tunics. Established in 1996, the Center for Traditional Textiles of Cusco works to preserve ancient textile skills. The center is a living museum in which wool and thread are spun and woven in traditional and non-traditional ways. Weaving has religious and historical connections. The Inca citizens honored Mother Earth, Pachamama, in woven cloth. Spinning, dyeing, and weaving record the hard work of the civilization's women, from the lowest, peasant wife, to the noble Koya, the primary wife of the Inca ruler. The center integrates weaving skills into modern education by partnering skilled weavers with community children. It also rewards outstanding artistry by displaying weavers' works and offering financial prizes for particularly beautiful works. The center provides a place for weavers to work their craft and demonstrate their skills to the public. To record the historical significance of textiles in the Andes Mountains, the center interviewed more than 80 weavers. They documented traditional patterns and identified weavers who produced the same geometric and figure patterns, so honored in the days of Pachacuti, R. 1438 to 1471, and Tupac Yupanqui, R. 1471-1493. Calanyopa serves as director and principal weaver for the Cusco Center for Traditional Textiles. She spins raw materials, cotton, llama wool, alpaca wool, and vicuña wool, the wool of a wild llama relative, into yarn, as her ancestors did. While the center offers works for sale, buyers should expect to pay a high price for such quality weaving. For example, a tapestry made of vicuña wool might cost as much as $5,000. The price reflects the scarcity of vicuña, gold and silver. The Inca culture described gold as the sweat of the sun. Gold decorated the palaces of the Sapa Incas, the Inca nobility, and the Coricancha, the Temple of the Sun. Despite having only basic tools, goldsmiths and silversmiths made remarkably fine work. The emperor and crown princes owned earplugs made of fine strands of metal, mother-of-pearl mosaics against a gold background, gem-encrusted knives and plates, and funeral masks. In fact, the emperor's household fairly glowed with bright golden plates, wall plaques, utensils, jugs and arroballos, bottles. The Incas did not use much furniture, but the Sapa Inka did sit on a golden stool, or ride in a gold and gem-encrusted litter. He was shielded from the sun by umbrellas made of tropical bird feathers. Inca goldsmiths and silversmiths produced jewelry and artifacts as delicate as any produced in Europe at the time, without the special tools designed for such work. Goldsmiths pounded bright metal into thin sheets, using only stones. They laid the gold on a large, flat rock, then hammered it with smaller, rounded stones in their hands. The gold was heated, pounded, and cooled again, repeating until the gold sheet was paper-thin. Smiths also created alloys of gold and silver, or other precious metals, and annealed, strengthened the metal by heating it in special furnaces. The Inca furnace was a technological marvel. Made of clay, it reached about 1830 degrees Fahrenheit, circa 900°C. To reach such high temperatures, furnaces required steady blasts of air blown onto the coals. For this, the Incas used long copper pipes and human labor. About a dozen pipes were inserted into blast holes in the furnace base, and workers blew into the pipes and forced more air over the coals. Using sharp, pointed tools, goldsmiths embossed the gold, created a design on the surface, with images of the sun, pumas, birds, or feathers. Like most other artists, goldsmiths lived in the city of Cusco and were supported by the government. They lived in houses, ate food and wore clothing the Sapa Inka's administrators provided. So fine was Inca gold and silver work that Spanish conquistadors and historians remarked on its quality. In 1613, Spaniard Juan de Torquemada stated that Inca smiths produced jewelry greatly surpassing that of our Spanish jewelers, because they could make birds whose heads, tongues, and wings could be made to move, and animals in whose paws they placed trinkets that seemed to dance, as quoted in Inca's Lords of Gold and Glory. Archaeologists have discovered many gold and silver artifacts in Inca burial mounds have uncovered silver statues of musicians playing little flutes, hammered gold goblets and pitchers, and shiny pectorals, chest ornaments, cut from thin sheets of gold. Personal items, such as tweezers for removing whiskers and knives for cutting meat, lay among the bones of Incas long dead. These buried artifacts accompanied only nobles into the afterlife. Commoners never owned precious metal items. Pottery. Like weaving, pottery and ceramic skills developed centuries before the Inca Empire rose to power. Examples of Chavin, 900 to 200 BCE, and Moshe, 100 to 700 pottery have been uncovered in ruins, temples, and burial sites. These pieces include vessels for drinking beer, large urns and jars to store or cook foods, round vases, and small statues. The ceramics of these cultures have complex geometric patterns, birds and animals, occasionally human forms, and human figures in action. Although Inca pottery was decorated, the ideal piece was useful and easy to produce in large numbers. Earlier cultures borrowed the decorations and shapes of ceramic pieces. The palace never designed these somewhat plain clay jugs and crockery for use. Only gold and silver were satisfactory for a ruler who claimed he was the son of the sun. For all their beauty, gold jewelry, textiles, and pottery resulted from hard work, the guiding force of Inca life. Work, not play, dominated the Inca daily schedule, and there was little time for fun and games. Athletic contests were only open to sons of the nobility and were associated with male puberty rites. Foot races at full speed down an Andes mountainside often provided many more wounded than winners. But they were one source of public entertainment. Young men also played war games in which they demonstrated their skills with slingshots, clubs, lances, or bolas. Hunting provided the sport with a positive result: meat. The Sapa Inka's forests prohibited hunting, and those who did risked execution upon capture. A government-authorized hunt provided guanacos, vicuñas, both wild relatives of the llama, deer and other meats for festivals, drying and storing. Hunters used slingshots and lances, weapons common to the battlefield, to hunt large game. Communities delighted in the hunt because it brought a change in work patterns, dancing, feasting, music, and plenty of drinking. When nobles got together, they often played a gambling game called ailoscas for high stakes. Over time, the rules for playing ailoscas have disappeared. However, chronistas recount stories of winners acquiring new lands, homes, or even young wives from the losers. Children played with tops, balls, and dice made from bits of pottery. Girls may have had simple dolls, although it is likely that caring for younger siblings replaced playing house. Like their parents, children had little playtime and many responsibilities, including helping in the fields, harvesting crops, preparing food, and keeping their homes clean. Among the more pleasant tasks for children might have been searching forests and meadows for medicinal herbs. Music. Musicians were among the many artisans who lived and worked under Inca rule. Panpipes, a musical instrument made from a row of short pipes tied together, called sicuris or zampoña, have been part of Andes music for centuries, and the haunting notes of the panpipes sang across the mountains and valleys of the Inca Empire. In Inca times, pipers made their own instruments from bamboo. Thin reeds, chiles or icas, produced high soprano notes, while flat, thick reeds, toyos, made the bass and baritone notes. The pipers formed a circle around their conductor, alternating notes between two or more pipers. They played the pipes by blowing across the opening at the top of each reed. Making music with panpipes is much like blowing across glass bottles. Air moving across the hollow space creates a tone. The larger the pipes, the lower the notes, and the stronger the breath required to make a sound. Thus, toyos players needed powerful lungs. Flutes, rattles, and drums accompanied the panpipes. Musicians made flutes, quenas, from bamboo and animal leg bones. Quenas range from small instruments for high notes to large ones for low notes. Their sound resembles that of a recorder. Another flute, a wooden tarka, provided music for religious rites and had a tone similar to an oboe. Rattles added rhythm to Inca music. The chacchas consists of several llama or goat hooves on a string that produces clicking noises when shaken. The chaucha is a natural rattle made from a dried seed pod with many small beans. This instrument produces a noise like Mexican maracas and has been part of traditional Andes music since long before the Spanish arrived in Peru. Small rattles were attached to the ankles or wrists of dancers, enabling them to produce their own rhythms as they moved. Another intriguing rattle is the palo de lluvia, which means rain stick. A musician drills holes in a long bamboo reed to make a traditional rain stick and slides thin sticks through the holes. The musician partially fills the bamboo tube with dried beans or pebbles and seals the ends. The musician flips the instrument over to play it. The beans rattle against the sticks as they roll, producing a sound like rainfall. Like the panpipes and flutes, rattles are still used in traditional Andes music. Drums have been around since humans first struck hollow logs with animal bones. The Andes created their version of the drum by stretching animal skins over hollow wood sections. Military drums followed a dark tradition. The drum skins came from the bodies of slain enemies. The pounding sound of sticks, bones, or hands against a human skin drum terrorized the Inca's enemies. The Incas did not make metal horns such as trumpets or bugles. However, they did use conch shell trumpets for military, religious, and civil ceremonies. The military signaled the start of battle by blowing the conch. The bellow of a conch also summons the faithful to temples and plazas for religious rituals. In civil life, checks, postal runners, blew on the conch to alert the next post of their arrival. Like music, dance expresses the emotions of the people. For the Inca people, dancing provided a release from work, a way to worship their gods, and a way to actively participate in rituals. Traditional Inca dances tell stories in the same way that some ballets do today. It also allowed unmarried men to pursue a potential bride, commemorate a life event such as a new child or a death, and have fun. Today, more than 700 dances exist from pre-Inca and Empire times. These dances usually involve many dancers, some for men alone, others just for women, and others for couples. One popular dance form, Daravi, originated with Inca poetry and is a long, sad song about lost or unfulfilled love and loneliness. The Huayno, performed at major festivals, features couples dancing to a pounding rhythm, moving together yet rarely touching. Today's popular folk dances in the Andes blend the traditional dances of Inca times with modern rhythms. Dance continues to be an important part of festivals and celebrations. The instruments and dance steps of the Inca days blended electric guitars and African rhythms to create new music for the Andes. Legends and drama. The Inca culture has preserved its music and dance, but its literary heritage has nearly vanished. Without a written language, plays, legends, and poems were passed down by oral tradition. The Sapa Inka and his court enjoyed the clever comedies and tragedies that the Amautas, wise men, devised. Cronista Garcilaso de la Vega wrote, in the Inca's royal commentaries, the actors were Incas or nobles, curazas, captains, and even camp commanders. Each one, in fact, being obliged to possess in real life the quality or occupy the function of the role he interpreted. The themes of the tragedies were always taken from history and usually related the triumphs and valorous acts of one of the early kings or some other hero of the empire. Sadly, most of these historical dramas vanished once the Spanish Catholic priests became powerful in Peru. The priests decided this kind of entertainment was heathen, because many plays mentioned Inca gods or referred to Sapa Inkas as gods. Consequently, they forbade the public performance of myths or plays featuring Inca religious symbols or themes. Longer plays and myths were lost because they were never performed and could not be remembered. The remaining bits of Inca literature are poetry and short legends, material easy to recite in homes. Even the greatest chroniclers of Inca history found only a few samples of Inca literature. Garcilaso de la Vega recorded several short poems, translating them into Spanish for his reading audience. Trepanning, cutting holes into the skull for medical purposes, was common on the battlefields where men struck by clubs often had crushed skulls. Before beginning surgery, doctors often used coca and other drugs to numb the patient. Relieving pressure on the brain from such wounds or removing bone splinters were not the only reasons for trepanning. Mental illnesses and physical problems, such as epilepsy and migraine headaches, may have been other reasons for brain surgery. The people of the Andes performed brain surgery on living patients earlier in history, and more often than anywhere else in the world. Archaeologists have dated trepanned skulls back to roughly 400 BC. Literally, hundreds of skulls, with various circular or rectangular holes cut into them, have been found in burial mounds throughout Peru. Many more than exist from other civilizations that performed trepanning. Scientists discovered that in some cultures, trepanning was performed on corpses to release the spirit or soul of the deceased. On the other hand, the Incas performed incisions on living bone. Examination of Inca trepanned skulls reveals that bone healed, and a surprising number of the patients lived. Healing involved the entire community. Women assumed responsibility for caring for and feeding the sick, including anyone within the Ailu. Since people rarely lived alone, someone was always on hand to tend to a wounded or sick person. Traveling healers consult with local herbal experts in choosing the best prescription for any illness. However, the Inca culture left nothing to chance and used supernatural forces to aid the healing process. Ritual sacrifice, such as burning coca in the interest of the appropriate gods. Although people of the Andes cultures did not experience widespread diseases such as smallpox, measles, or flu before the arrival of the Spanish, they did get serious illnesses. Evidence indicates that tuberculosis, malaria, syphilis, and leprosy existed in the Andes during Inca times. So did intestinal and stomach worms, such as tapeworms and pinworms, and lice infestations. The lack of written language held back the advance of Inca medicine. Knowledge of how to diagnose and treat disease had to be handed from parent to child, and many prescriptions were probably lost. Luckily, Spanish priests recorded local remedies in their journals, preserving many recipes for herbal tonics, infusions, and ointments. Mathematics and science. As with medicine, Inca science and mathematics did not advance much during the years of the empire because there was no written language. People with scientific interests often lost discoveries because they couldn't record their experiments or the insights they gained from them. This also prevented them from sharing widely with others. Geologic events, earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, and severe weather patterns, droughts or blizzards, were, to the Inca mind, the result of angry gods. The people attempted to soothe the gods' anger by sacrificing food, clothing, and occasionally, humans. Astronomy, a subject that captivated Mayan and Egyptian minds, generated limited interest among the Incas. People observed the movements of the sun, the moon, and the planet Venus. They also recognized the shift in the sun's path that accompanied the winter solstice, when the sun reaches its lowest point in the sky, and the summer solstice when it reaches its highest point. In Cusco, Inca architects built 8 towers, 4 facing the rising sun, and 4 facing the setting sun. We set the towers to trace and note the sun's path. On the solstices, the sun left no shadow beside key columns. The study of plants and animals also held little interest, except that they helped increase crops or raise healthy llama herds. Through experimentation, the Incas developed new varieties of potatoes and corn that produced more or larger vegetables, greater resistance to frost or cold, or increased production in arid regions. The Inca world developed mathematics through practical applications. Again, the Incas had no written numerical systems, so more advanced mathematics never developed. Thanks to mathematical computations, though, the Incas were able to survey and divide up land among the Ailis. Quipus, the Inca Knot database, was used to record crop and manufacturing yields, assess taxes, and document payments. In addition to the Khipu, the Incas developed a counting board, the Yupana, that used dots and circles to keep track of numbers. The Incas relied heavily on their version of the decimal system. Groups of 10 were important to the government and within the military. The basic unit of civil management was the Ailu, a group of 10 households. Similarly, the basic unit in the military was a troop of 10 soldiers. Inca management developed larger units, with a leader at each level. A curacao never managed a group of 1,046 households, since such uneven amounts were unacceptable. Instead, the extra 46 households were folded into a new precinct, realigning perhaps dozens of communities to establish precise units. When the Spanish arrived in the Inca Empire, they were astounded by the accuracy of the Inca census. The government authorities knew how many people lived in the empire, their age, sex, marital status, profession, social class, productivity, and location. With advanced technology and supercomputers available to the United States government today, a national census is taken every 10 years, and the resulting statistics allow for various error rates. The Incas took their census, reassigned agricultural plots, and assessed taxes yearly with no errors. Building and architecture. Inca architects and engineers had the greatest understanding of and use for practical mathematics. They produced accurate models of buildings. In light of the recent damage caused by earthquakes, architects might consider using Inca techniques to join stone to stone. The basic materials of Inca stonework were simple: locally available limestone or granite, simple stone tools, water, and sand. An Inca architect developed a plan for a building complete with a model. Skilled masons, stoneworkers, and builders marked the foundation according to the model. Then came the clever work, fitting stone to stone. Stones were cut at a quarry and moved to the building site by brute force because the Incas did not have wheels or pulleys to lessen the burden of moving stones weighing many tons. While it is impossible to know, some scientists believe the Incas used levers to hoist the building stones onto smaller, rounded stones, making them easier to move. The huge stone blocks were sorted by size and shape at the construction site, fitting the pieces together like a jigsaw puzzle. At that point, a skilled mason shaped two stones to fit side by side. He did this by carving some areas that curved in and some that curved out. Says author John Hemming in Monuments of the Incas, there was no secret formula, no magic chemical that could shape the stones, nothing but cutting with stone axes, abrasion with sand and water, and the skill and dedication of Inca masons. These are primitive techniques, but the fit between stones was so tight that many of these walls remain standing today. Nearly 1,000 years ago, construction began on the funeral buildings at Wilcarwain in northern Peru. They have outlasted Spanish architecture and modern construction projects in a region of earthquakes. They understood towns and local geographic features. They also understood elevations, how the land rises, angles, and how the shape of the land affects building plans. Of all the legacies the Incas left, their architectural achievements are the most enduring. The Inca army marched along paved roads that stretched from the empire's extreme north to its southern border. The roads, mostly paved with stone, connected region to region and city to city, and all roads even led to Cusco. The roads followed two basic systems. The coastal system ran along the Pacific Ocean, while the Andes system built its way along mountain passes and valleys. Each area presented obstacles. The mountains were steep, dangerous and rugged, while the coastal roads passed through the dry desert with its blowing sands. East-west roads connected the north-south highways and made travel to any region easy. At its greatest, the empire maintained more than 15,625 miles of roads. The roads were the main transportation routes for government officials, battalions of soldiers, and shipments of food and goods, mostly tax payments. Every few miles along the roads, rest areas provided shelter, food, and clothing for travelers. These rest areas were supported by the Sapa Inka and maintained by government workers. At key crossroads, transportation hubs, known as tampu, housed huge lodges to accommodate dozens of travelers, or the military. Huts along the roads housed chasquis, the Inca equivalent of a postal service. Mountainous areas have fast-flowing rivers and deep ravines that seem impossible to cross. However, Inca engineers devised several styles of bridges. Engineers preferred to use tree trunks as bridges over narrow streams or crevices. They built stone bridges by laying slabs across wider gaps. Bridges made of leather, hemp rope, and agave fiber were called braided bridges, and were remarkably strong and durable. One such bridge spans the Apurimac River near the present-day town of Queshuachaca. However, true Inca ingenuity came with the huaros, uruyas, and tarabitas, which resembled modern-day cable cars. Thick willow branches were interwoven to create baskets or gondolas, suspended from ropes of strong chawa fiber. The ropes, attached to tree trunks or boulders, were strong enough to support 1 or 2 people in each gondola. When the Spanish arrived, they transported their horses across ravines using harnesses hooked over these ropes. According to historian Carmen Bernand in the Incas, people of the sun, whereas in the valleys, river crossings were made by rafts, the mountain torrents were crossed using rope bridges or baskets suspended from cables. Moreover, all these crossing points were supervised, and nobody could carry a load across without paying a toll. Extensive building programs required millions of hours of labor, which were provided mainly through the Mite. Every Puric contributed a few weeks each year to the government, during which he was assigned to whatever project was the local priority. Mitar projects involved constructing and maintaining roads, bridges, government buildings, irrigation ditches and canals and temples. Hundreds of skilled masons, architects and engineers kept busy throughout the year, contributing the knowledge needed to oversee every project. Today's architects were greatly interested in the Inca use of geometric shapes in buildings. Trapezoids, 4-sided figures with only 2 sides parallel, were used as doorways, windows, alcoves and niches. The wider end of the trapezoid served as part of the foundation, and the narrow end supported the walls above, much as a lintel supports a doorway. The northeast wall of Inca Roca's palace, built in the 14th century, is an excellent example of the Inca use of geometric blocks. Some blocks in this palace are 12-sided, yet each stone links perfectly with its neighbors. The site carved the blocks from local material. Most doors and windows were made of multiple blocks. The Inca civilization emphasized function and practicality over beauty, except for water use. When architects and engineers incorporated springs and streams into their work, they surprisingly preferred the artistic aspect. Water flow was altered wherever possible. So natural springs bubbled into decorative pools or streams gushed from stone spouts. Water spilled from stone pipes into large pools in palaces fell into smaller basins and flowed out along open aqueducts. While many examples of Inca architecture remain, historians believe that more would have survived if the Spanish had not been so determined. The Spanish were amazed to find sturdy bridges with nothing but fiber rope spanning the deep Andes ravines. In 2007, students from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or MIT, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, decided to learn about this Inca technology by building a rope bridge of their own. The students made a fiber rope bridge 60 feet, 0 to 18 meters long and 2 feet wide across a dry basin between 2 campus buildings. They made the ropes according to the instructions in Cronista Garcilaso de la Vega's chronicles. The students wove together 12 strands of twine to make each primary rope. Then, 3 of these 12-ply ropes were braided to make the major cables. 14 students met 2 evenings a week, and occasional afternoons to braid the ropes. They estimated they spent 360 hours twisting rope and used 50 miles, ca 80 kilometers of sisal twine. When the students walked across the bridge, it proved strong and safe. Machu Picchu. The mountaintop retreat of Machu Picchu, in Quechua the name means Old Peak, remained hidden in the Andes for centuries until Hiram Bingham, a Yale University professor, found the site in 1911. In truth, the ruins were never lost, since local people always knew exactly where Machu Picchu was, at the top of a 9,000-foot mountain. The site contains a remarkable city that was once a country palace for the Sapa Inka. Mountain mists conceal more than 150 houses, temples, baths, storage rooms, and palaces. The site has a cemetery, facilities for processing grain, and a plaza for festivals. One of Machu Picchu's most beautiful features is the many fountains, which were created from natural springs that ripple down rock walls or pool in sunken tubs. The stonework shows off the skills of Inca masons. The Inca masons constructed walls by fitting cut stones so tightly that a knife could not pass through them. Some of the individual building stones weigh more than 50 tons. Artifacts found at Machu Picchu include bronze, copper and silver cups and urns, ceramic plates and bowls, bracelets, pins and earrings, as well as tools such as knives and axes. There was no gold. There were no royal burials at the site. Although scientists have found the skeletons of about 174 individuals at Machu Picchu, the locals were careful never to reveal Machu Picchu's location to the Spanish. The Spanish conquistadors looted temples and sacred huacas or shrines, while Catholic priests destroyed any religious items they found. Today, Machu Picchu is a United Nations World Heritage Site and a major tourist attraction for people willing to hike along the top of the Andes Mountains. Thousands of people have flocked to see the ancient city in the clouds. Unfortunately, their arrival has set off a major disagreement. Conservationists and cultural preservation organizations want to control tourist traffic, which reaches at least 400,000 people yearly, because traffic and trash damage historic sites. The stone trail that leads up to Machu Picchu is littered with water bottles, tea bags, and snack wrappers. Many visitors have ignored regulations to control the waste problem. Peru has imposed restrictions limiting the number of people allowed on the trail daily to reduce the number of visitors. Only 500 people may visit each day, and they must be accompanied by a registered guide and pay a fee of $50. Erase all elements of non-Christian religion. Unquestionably, the best construction went into building temples, which the Spanish either took apart or built over. The walls of the Coricancha in Cusco, for example, became the foundation stones for the Spanish-built church of Santo Domingo, and the Catholic church in Huaytara rises atop a marvelous Inca temple, adorned with trapezoidal windows and doorways. In a small town in the Andes, a mother rises before dawn. She blows on the glowing coals in the fireplace to get a fire going. She picks up a bucket and goes to a stream for fresh water. Returning to her one-room adobe hut, she prepares a breakfast of hot cornmeal and potatoes. Her husband and two oldest sons rise and clear away the hand-woven blankets they sleep on. After eating, they join several men and head toward one of the community potato fields, an hour's walk from the village. The men carry hoes, shovels, and empty sacks. It is time to harvest potatoes, a back-breaking job lasting for days. At home, the mother wakes her three youngest children. They eat breakfast, and she prepares a lunch of potato soup and chicha. Her daughters help her feed the chickens and guinea pigs, milk their one cow, and clean the house. Cleaning takes little time since the family owns no furniture besides a plain wooden stool. Dawn breaks as the mother heads to the fields with almuerzo, the hot lunch for her family working there. The mother prepares dinner in the afternoon for the farm workers and their families, who will eat together. She slaughters, skins, and roasts guinea pigs. Her daughters prepare another dish featuring potatoes and 24 ears of corn. Of course, the workers will drink chicha. She wraps the dinner in a blanket and carries the food and beer to the fields on her back. Other mothers join her, bringing food. They spread out the feast, and everyone shares the meal. The family returns to their home to sleep before beginning yet another day digging potatoes from the hard Andes mountain soil. This farming remains the economic model for campesinos, who scrape by in the mountains of Peru and Ecuador today. Family life differs only slightly from peasant life in Inca times. The food, home, and method of making a living are the same. The clothes are slightly different, although most people still wear materials they or their neighbors make themselves. Many remote towns have no electricity or running water. Some have no schools for the children to attend, and most children work to help their families survive. The spirit of the Ailu continues in today's Andes communities. Neighbors and family members plow, plant, and harvest together. They share the crops, work together to prepare and store food, and build or repair homes. As in Inca times, citizens maintained the local roads and irrigation canals, and every family had to provide this service or pay a heavy fine. The community or several neighboring villages support regular local open markets. At these markets, cloth, hats, leather goods, herbs, extra vegetables, and cooked foods, such as roasted corn on the cob and grilled llama meat, are sold. Buyers bargain over prices, paying in either currency or trading their goods. The markets provide an opportunity for people to exchange goods and gossip. The main difference between ancient and modern times is the radio. At night, as it gets dark, the family lies on their blankets and listens as Peru's national soccer team takes on Brazil. Throwing off Spanish rule, the Inca Empire was once huge, stretching across the borders of today's Peru, Ecuador, Chile, Colombia, and Bolivia. Peru and Ecuador have the strongest links to the ancient empire, while only small portions of the other three countries came under Inca control. Since the Inca Empire disappeared, the five countries have shared several common problems: unstable governments, wars, poverty, threats to natural resources, and human rights struggles for the native peoples. From the 16th century to the 19th century, Spain ruled former Inca lands with total disregard for the welfare of native peoples. In the 1800s, national pride gripped the people, and the citizens of the former Inca Empire began a struggle for independence. Peru declared its independence in 1821. Their revolution was finally successful in 1826, under the leadership of Simón Bolívar, 1783–1830. Bolivia, named after Bolívar, threw out the Spanish in 1824 after a rebel victory led by General Antonio José de Sucre. The new Bolivian government struggled under the leadership of corrupt politicians. In 1836, Bolivia allied with Peru, forming a two-country confederation. A little more than 40 years later, this union was dissolved after the War of the Pacific, 1879 to 1884, which forced Peru to give up some land to Chile. Similar revolutions freed Colombia from Spanish rule in 1819 and Ecuador in 1822. Ecuador, Colombia, and Venezuela formed the Federación de Gran Colombia. Bolívar helped establish the federation. Venezuela and Ecuador left the Union in 1830 to form independent countries. In 1885, Colombia formed a republic, a government with elected officials. But political differences among the leaders led to the first of several civil wars. The First Civil War, 1899 to 1902, resulted in the deaths of nearly 100,000 citizens. The Second, 1949 to 1957, left behind a devastated country after even more deaths. Chile's independence came as Spain fell to an army led by José de San Martín, 1778 to 1850, in 1817. The country's new leader, Bernardo O'Higgins, 1778 to 1842, established a government that slowly replaced dictatorship with democracy over many years. The third party in the War of the Pacific, Chile, acquired copper-rich territory from Peru and Bolivia at the war's end. The 20th century. The 20th century brought more chaos to former Inca territory. In Peru, a string of dictators took over the government. Between 1968 and 1980, Peru came under the military's control. The military government implemented extensive land reform despite not being democratically elected. This reform broke up some large landholdings and helped smaller farmers gain land. Radical groups such as Shining Path, Sendero Luminoso, and the Tupac Amaru revolutionary movement arose. They waged warfare against the military government. When the representative government was restored, these groups targeted democratically elected governments. They led brutal attacks that have had far-reaching negative consequences for the civilian population, especially in rural areas. In 2006, former leader Alan Garcia won the presidential election. During Garcia's earlier time in office in the late 1980s, Peru's economy fell. Modern Bolivian politics consists of a series of wars and military takeovers. In the 1930s, the country fought a war with Paraguay that caused Bolivia to lose territory. A radical political group made up of miners, the National Revolutionary Movement seized power in 1943 and again in 1952. While attempts to reform mining and land use failed, the Bolivian people demanded change. In 1964, guerrilla leader Ernesto Che Guevara, 1928 to 1967, led a revolution to overthrow the government. Guevara was a communist who fostered a people's revolution in Bolivia. Communism is a system in which the government controls almost all political and economic activity. Guevara met his demise in a Bolivian jungle in 1967, as his efforts yielded no positive results. Guevara's government was followed by a series of oppressive military dictatorships. Today, Bolivia has a democratically elected president. The current president, Evo Morales, shocked the world economy in 2006 when he put the country's energy industry under government control. This action forced foreign energy companies to sell just over half their holdings to the government or leave Bolivia. Ecuador's politics over the past century mirrored its neighbors' military takeovers and dictatorships. Radical student groups rioted in the streets in 1987. The economy failed. New military dictators replaced the old ones, and nothing changed. Continued political unrest, particularly among native peoples, forced the removal of President Jamil Mahuad in 2000. The country has had 3 presidents since 1997. President Rafael Correa, elected in 2007, has begun making reforms that will hopefully help the country's many poor people. Colombia's government has been undermined by powerful drug lords who dominate the country, its military, and its police. During the 1980s, political murders became daily events as drug gangs funded highly paid assassins and groups of rebels fighting small military actions. In the 1990s, radical military groups such as the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, and the National Liberation Army, ELN, terrorized the country, blew up oil pipelines, and kidnapped wealthy business people and political figures. In 2002, peace talks with FARC fell apart. President Alvaro Uribe finds himself in a challenging situation. He has cracked down on FARC and ELN and is constantly battling against drug traffic out of his country. Chile's population did no better with its political leaders. President Salvador Allende, 1908 to 1973, elected in the 1970s, tried to establish land reform and government-run key industries, a socialist system. A military takeover backed by the United States threw out Allende. General Augusto Pinochet, born 1915, took control. Unemployment rose under Pinochet, as did union strikes and human rights abuses. Government police arrested and killed many opposition leaders. Chilean voters insisted on a presidential election in 1989. Pinochet agreed and lost the election. He remained at the head of Chile's army until 1998. Chile's current president, Michelle Bachelet, is the ruling party's 4th consecutive leader. The economy depends on copper. And with the increase in copper prices worldwide, Chile thrives. The empire today. Traces of Inca greatness and Spanish heritage mingle throughout the 5 nations that once formed the Inca Empire. Nearly half, 45% of Peru's population consists of Quechua people, called indigenous. Mestizos, people of mixed Quechua and European heritage, make up another 37%. Spanish and Quechua are official Peruvian languages, and many indigenous speak only Quechua, the Inca tongue. Most people who live in the territory of the former Inca Empire today follow the Roman Catholic faith. Spanish mission. However, the dominance of Catholicism does not mean that the ancient gods and religious traditions have been completely forgotten. For example, Inti Raymi, the celebration honoring the sun god Inti, has been revived in some Andes communities. The countries that span the Andes Mountains today were all once under the influence of the Inca Empire. In 2002, archaeologists used bulldozers to dig up thousands of Inca mummies buried under a ghetto on the outskirts of Lima, Peru. The bodies were roughly 500 years old and included at least 2,000 men, women, and children. Scientists estimate that the graveyard may contain more than 10,000 dead. Mummy bundles, groups buried together, held up to 7 corpses, binding children and parents together for eternity. According to an article in National Geographic, thousands of Inca mummies raised from their graves. About 40 of the mummy bundles are topped with false heads, known to archaeologists as falsas cabezas. Such heads, some covered with wigs, were known to be attached to mummy bundles that encased the Inca elite. Until this discovery, only one falsa cabeza during the Inca period is believed to have been documented. Also recovered were 50,000 to 60,000 artifacts, from personal valuables to food and everyday utensils. The discovery provides archaeologists and historians with evidence of how the Inca people lived, burial rites, and beliefs. The evidence is considered very reliable since the mummy bundles lay undisturbed. The mummies were preserved under ideal conditions and hair and skin remained intact. The graveyard was found in an area where poor people lived in shacks. It is named Tupac Amaru after the last Inca ruler. It provided a refuge for Andes residents who left the mountains during the 1980s to escape violence by local political groups. Textile cooperatives, businesses run jointly by their members, in Ecuador and Peru, keep up the ancient traditions of weaving and spinning and provide native peoples with income. Among the most successful weavers' cooperatives are those at Otavalo and Taquile. Otavalo weavers sell their textiles at a market in Quito, Ecuador. They produce tapestries, cloth, belts, blankets, and other goods using either the traditional backstrap looms of their Inca ancestors or larger treadle looms, similar to those brought to Ecuador by the Spanish. A treadle loom has wooden frames and a foot pedal, or treadle. Taquile, an island in Peru, has been home to a colony of weavers for centuries. The colors and designs of Taquile textiles tell whether a man is married or single. A knitted cap with white tufts shows a man is available, and a cap's red peaks signify his marital status. Taquile belt designs depict seasonal or calendar events such as the month for repairing roofs or planting crops. Major Peruvian cities, such as Lima, Cusco, and Arequipa, have become financial centers where industry, mining, and banking dominate. Yet the economy of the Inca region struggles, and many of those who live in poverty are descendants of Inca subjects. Peru is in a financial crisis, with more than half of the population living below the poverty line. Young indigenous leave their Andes villages to find work in the cities, but unemployment rates are around 9%. They live in shacks on the outskirts of the cities, in conditions far worse than those in their home villages. Ecuador's and Colombia's economies depend heavily on agriculture. They produce bananas, cocoa, and coffee for export and staple foods such as corn and potatoes. Nearly 40% of Ecuador's citizens live in poverty. Unemployment exceeds 10%, and inflation is now controlled at just over 3%. Nearly 50% of Colombia's citizens live in poverty, while a handful of Colombians rank among the wealthiest people in the world. Colombian unemployment stands at 11%. Bolivia is the poorest country in South America. The economy depended on tin, accounting for nearly 1/3 of all exports. When tin prices dropped worldwide in 1985, the Bolivian economy collapsed. The loss of tin mining as a moneymaker has led to a rise in illegal coca farming. Today, coca and cocaine production accounts for half of the nation's exports and is a major problem. As in Ecuador, poverty strikes 6 out of 10 people in Bolivia. Chile's citizens fare better than their neighbors. Chileans earn more per person than most other South Americans. Industry and service jobs comprise 3/4 of the jobs filled by the Chilean labor force. Although unemployment hovers at 8%, inflation is low, and consumer goods are readily available. When archaeologists from Yale University uncovered the ancient Inca cities of Cusco and Machu Picchu, they took many artifacts back to the United States. For some time now, the government of Peru has wanted them back. After several heated discussions, Yale and Peru reached an agreement in 2007. Peru will build a new museum and research center in Cusco to display the Inca artifacts. Yale will recognize Peru's ownership of objects found in university digs, such as bones and other artifacts from Machu Picchu. The two parties will continue with the research as a joint project. Most of the materials in question were collected by Hiram Bingham, beginning in 1911. Peru claimed that while Bingham was given permission to study the artifacts he found, he was never told he could keep them. The agreement resolves the dispute to the satisfaction of both parties. Conservation and environmental issues concern Andes residents, many of whom live in tune with the natural world. In Peru, uncontacted cultures, tribes without contact with the outside world, face invasion by loggers determined to collect mahogany trees illegally from protected lands. These lands belong to the tribes who live on them, such as the Amahuacas, the Shanamahuas, and the Yora Yaminaguas, and the tribes have met the arrival of logging teams with bows and arrows. They also string thick vines across rivers to prevent boats from accessing their land. Although mahogany harvest in this region is illegal, stolen wood can yield thieves millions of dollars each year. Pollution from mining operations, air pollution in cities, cutting down forests, and water pollution are some of the environmental problems faced by people of the region today. In Ecuador, Peru, and northern Chile, deserts are expanding. This adds to soil erosion and reduces productivity in villages where farming remains the mainstay of the people. Sprawling cities, industrialization, and increased population cause environmental problems, affecting all citizens equally. Each of the countries has developed federal conservation plans. We have yet